Tēnā koutou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. First item on the agenda is apologies. I've received apologies from Kathy Casey, Alf Filipina and Councillor John Walker for absence, from Councillor Wayne Walker and John Watson for absence on council business, and from Councillor Penny Hulse for lateness on council business. So I move that those apologies be accepted. Do I have a seconder? Professor Collins. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 To the contrary, no. Carried. Declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a potential interest that they need to declare in terms of the agenda items today?
Ross.
Councillor Clow.
Yeah, my wife is a casual librarian, so I declare an interest on the petition 5.1.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Confirmation of minutes. We have the minutes of the 23rd of March 2017. I move that those minutes be confirmed. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Greg Sayers. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to petitions, and we have accepted a request from Julia Schiller of Love Our Libraries with a petition in relation to Save Our Super City Librarians. Could I ask Julia please to come to the table if she'd like to be accompanied by somebody? Julia, the way that we deal with petitions is generally to give you 5 minutes. We're reasonably strict on time, as we are with councillors' speeches, and then there'll be the opportunity for councillors, if they have any questions, to ask questions of you. But welcome, thank you for coming along, and thank you also to the support group that was outside here today.
Thank you. I have practiced. It might be closer to 6 minutes. Kia ora, Mayor Goff and Auckland councillors. My name is Julia Schiller, and I represent a grassroots community campaign called Love Our Libraries. Our group arose in support of our excellent library system amid rumors of drastic changes to that system. I request permission to table this document, which is a selection of testimonials we gathered at libraries, plus some comments left on Action Station and in our Facebook group. Whilst visiting libraries, we were struck by the uniqueness of each branch, how it reflects and responds to its community's needs and aspirations. Many people mentioned their library's role as a community center. We also saw that our libraries are especially important to vulnerable people in our society. The Love Our Libraries Facebook group has over 450 members, and at last count, there are about 3,200 signatures on our petition, which I will send to you later today via Sandra O'Toole. You might think these numbers are low, and perhaps you can ignore them, but let's be honest, the bulk of the community still doesn't know about the changes to our libraries. With the media attention over the past few days, we've had over 2,000 signatures added just since Saturday. Council's Fit for the Future program, which was launched last year, was meant to be a, quote, program of work to evolve libraries to better meet the growing demand for digital and online services, and at the same time make sure that the services offered at each location are based on the needs of the communities they serve. Coincidentally, Fit for the Future will also save $1.8 million a year. Perhaps the reality of this program is more to do with saving money than with modernizing the library service. We have learned that Fit for the Future machinations began almost a year ago, a few months before this body was elected, and it included a hiring freeze that's been going on since then. Who instigated this program and why? Many librarians are talking to our campaign. They raise serious questions around the staff consultation process. One person described receiving frequent emails which felt like a box-ticking process with no detail about what new positions would actually look like. It also seems the library's HR department has had a lot of turnover, and they were unable to manage the process professionally. One former HR employee told me, that nowhere in the consultation were employees told that most of their current positions would be disestablished. Surely this is not how our country's largest council is operating. The ongoing job uncertainty has caused unacceptable levels of stress and loss of morale for library staff. It's a bad sign when over 10% of a workforce request voluntary redundancy. The library profession is all about sharing information, yet our librarians were instructed not to tell the public what was happening. They were even supplied with a script to follow should any member of the public get wind of the plans and make inquiries. I understand some of you tried to make inquiries and were told it was an operational matter, so you shouldn't concern yourselves. I've also been told that the public has no right to weigh in on staffing matters. However, when I spoke to the library's general manager, Merla Edmondson, on March 24th, she categorized Fit for the Future not as a staffing restructure, but as a service restructure, in which case there should have been proper public consultation. The council is changing service levels within our libraries, and the community has a right to be consulted. So far, 74 librarians have agreed to redundancy arrangements, and all of them will be gone by July 1st. When all is done, we stand to lose the immeasurable community and institutional knowledge of 15% of our library system's workforce, the equivalent of 7 libraries worth of staff. But it doesn't stop there, because as we speak, the remaining staff are playing a demeaning game of musical chairs, requiring they compete for the work that has been allowed to remain. Our communities will be further damaged by dismantling well-functioning teams of staff and yanking employees across local boards as if they were parts in a machine. Council administration has now sought to reassure the public that there will be no branches to close or hours to be scaled back, and that's great. But they also claim we'll have no reduction in level of service. How can this be when 74 staff have gone? Surely we're not saying that the libraries were previously overstaffed. This administrative approach cynically disregards the work, the knowledge, and the love our librarians provide their branches. It is impossible not to reduce service when staff are cut and juggled around. When I spoke to Ms. Edmondson, she told me the staff who agreed to redundancy, this is a quote, didn't wish to be part of the future. Here's an alternate view from a former employee. Knowing my position and extra hours were going to be axed, not knowing what the new positions would look like, where they would be, what hours, on what days, the unknown created too much anxiety in me. Also, the thought of going up against my colleagues was something that made me feel sick. Going to an interview to justify my existence without even knowing the details, couldn't stomach it. And maybe above all, the lack of respect I felt throughout the process around how everyone is being affected. Just FTEs, not people. Mayor Goff and councilors, recently we had some justice for caregivers. Today we are asking you to intervene on behalf of another largely female and underpaid workforce. A workforce employed by all of us and paid for by our tax dollars. Our city should seek to be a model employer, not to emulate the worst of a private sector that deprives people of a living wage, job security, and opportunities to upskill to meet changing needs. Our message is that libraries are not a business and should never be run as such. That there may be a business case justifying these changes will never make them the right thing to do. We trust you have the power to stop the current process, review it, restore the library budget, keep the remaining staff in their jobs, and to direct that any new changes in service and in staffing be instigated in an open, inclusive, bottom-up, and transparent way. Stand with us. Thousands of us have your back. Love our libraries. Save our librarians.
Thank you very much, Julia. Are there any councillors that would like to ask a question regarding the petition? Efeso Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Julia, for your presentation. There's commenting today on TV1's Breakfast was Mr. Hay from the Library Association, and he said that there's new technologies that are coming in. Are you convinced that the new technologies coming in warrant the changes that you're talking about?
Well, I think that technology should assist people. For example, the machines that you can check books out with, great, that frees up the librarians to have more time to interact with the public. As for ebooks, we're seeing a decline in their popularity. They've kind of peaked in overseas markets. I don't know about New Zealand, but apparently in Germany and the US, they're losing popularity. There have been some studies that people don't retain the information as well. So this technology, there's a lot of love still for the hard, resources and the human interaction at the libraries.
One further question.
Yes, supplementary
Mr.
question, Councillor Collins.
Thank you. In Otara and Manukau, where I come from, we have a lot of remedial programs. Is it your sense that some of those remedial programs may either be lost or there'll be a diminishing value to them, but with the possibility of the loss of these staff?
Yeah, of course we worry about that because the librarians over time establish relationships with individuals, children, people who are learning to read of all ages. Here in Auckland Central, they do a movie morning for the homeless community. So we don't really know all the details about these new positions, but surely moving people around is going to jeopardize those relationships that are really important, when you're learning skills like that.
Thank you.
Mike Lee and then Desley Simpson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. From what I've seen of libraries very recently, there seem to be more people in them more than ever. Every library I go into to look. Is there a suspicion, do you think this pretext of new technology is really just an excuse for old-fashioned neoliberal downsizing?
Yeah, it is hard to escape that conclusion, Councillor Lee. And really, $1.8 million is what we're talking about saving here, which is, I think, quite a small drop in your bucket. And yet, that will really impact every community library.
Are you aware that the council spends $3 million a year on paying a private company to buy books for the library?
I have heard that we've lost people in the acquisitions, I think it's called the acquisitions department of the library. And yeah, there is a worry that services are going to be privatized.
For $3 million a year.
Thank you. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Julia, last night you attended a meeting in the library at St Heliers that I was a speaker at. Just for the others, you'll know that the librarians were present. So what role do you think the librarians have when their key responsibility potentially is during the working, the time that the libraries are open to do their real core job? They're still involved, aren't they, after hours? So to keep the sort of the small part-time people do you think they could potentially help with some of that after-hours work when the library has to be kept open?
Quite possibly. I mean, I think there's probably some collective will to throw more resources at the library, hire more people, do some brainstorming about how else we can use that wonderful public space. And, we're in a time of increasing commercialization. Our public spaces are so precious to us. So I don't know if that answers your question, but...
I think the point I'm making is that the staff aren't just working library hours, they're actually working well in excess of that because more and more libraries are community spaces and community meeting spaces and used as a vital resource in community.
The volunteer component.
Okay, thank you very much, councillors. Julia, just the assurance that I'd want to give you is the assurance that we have received as councillors, and that is that there will be no reduction in service delivery and no library closures. In fact, you'll be aware, as I am, that in the last 2 terms of council, we've totally rebuilt 6 libraries, and we're in the process of spending 20 to 30 million on a new library in Westgate. We do accept that libraries perform a vital role in our community. They are the heart of our community. We also accept that there are changing patterns in how libraries are being used. So hopefully some of the positives out of this will be new mobile services to geographically and socially isolated communities and greater response to the increasing demand for digital services. But at this point, your petition will be received. It will be forwarded to our Chief Operating Officer for consideration, and the points that you and the signatories make on that taken seriously and taken into account. I wonder if I could call on a councillor to move the motion of thanks.
Second.
Councillor Simpson,
A second.
and seconded by Councillor Cooper. Do you want to move the...
I would definitely want to move that. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I would. I'd be delighted to. Thank you.
Okay, so it's a thank you very much for taking the time and with your supporters to draw to our attention the concerns that you have, that I know are genuine concerns and that I know reflect the love for libraries and the role that libraries play in our community. Thank you very much for that. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Right, thank you very much. We come now to item 6 on our agenda, which is public input, and we have accepted a request from David Hopkins to speak on the draft statement of intent for Auckland Transport, which is clearly on our agenda today. Could I ask David Hopkins to please come forward? Welcome, David, to the governing body of Auckland Council. You've got 5 minutes to speak, and then there'll be a chance for questions arising out of your comments. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the councillors and all the staff for the work that you're doing to really transform this into a great city. I'm talking about something that you all know about and experience just about every day. It's not unknown. It's just a little governance issue to put up there in your consideration. It's about congestion and how is the congestion on the roads handled in the statement of intent. My desire is that it's clearer. That's what I'm here. Are you satisfied that how the statement of intent that's going to be agreed between Council and Auckland Transport is clear enough on what's going to happen on congestion on the roads or not? I'm not. I've tried to understand it and think about it. I'm not clear enough? Yeah. So that's what I'm here to briefly mention. I don't need to tell you, you know, it's impacting on people, businesses, the movements of goods and services every day, all the time, and people are affected by it. You know, as I look around the council, there's just, you've all said these in different ways. What can we do about it? Now, we didn't cause this mess, the situation, and neither did Auckland Transport. It's just, here it is. So the question is not who's responsible for causing it, but what can we do about it? Yeah. And I believe that, you know, in this statement of intent, we do have the opportunity to set our expectations. Now, public transport is a big part of the answer. Hooray. You know, some fabulous advocates at this table and beyond for public transport and for other initiatives that will reduce the road loads, such as cycling and school, walking to school. There's a whole host of programs that make a big difference. And, you know, I'm, like the rest of you, I'm really in favour of those. I'm not speaking against that in any way. I'm just talking about that there is a residual that travels on the roads. Hey, the businesses and people, it just doesn't work for everybody to be able to use public transport and cycling and the other initiatives. So what can we expect of Auckland Transport, and how clear can we be of our expectations? Now, you're professionals, you've thought about this sort of thing. I don't know what the answer is. You've got great staff to draft really clear language, but my expectation as a person, I'm not from any organisation in saying this, is that you and I can understand what are we doing about each aspect of transport. What are we asking Auckland Transport to agree and to do, and how will we be able to measure it? Will we know? Now, in public transport, it's easier. We can look at numbers of boardings and we can see that shooting up, and that's a wonderful success story, and full credit to everybody involved in that. It's making a big difference. But you look at what's written for the roads, page 9 and 10 of the Statement of Intent. Is it really clear to you? And if not, I encourage you to see whether you want to send it back to the staff and say, come on, let's make this a little bit clearer. I have no question about expertise of Auckland Transport. If you ask them to do something, you know, they are the best that we can manage. And, you know, nothing that I'm saying is to take away from them at all. But when I read the measures that are proposed in that statement of intent about arterial road productivity, it's just opaque to me. You know, why are those roads so important? Why aren't other roads important? Why is it that the roads in the area where I live, and it's not only there, are just expanding and expanding in congestion, particularly at peak times? Are we really clear in either what we can do about it or the measure of it? Even if the answer is that the congestion is just getting worse and the productivity of our city is dropping, let's be honest about that and let's put that out there so that we can all have a conversation about it. Because, you know, people are telling you and they're telling each other what a pain it is, and how it's affecting people. You know, businesses that I've spoken to say we can't get staff because staff can't travel to get to our business. It's really hard for us to employ people. You know that anyway. You've heard all these kind of things. So that's my point. Let's ask for clear guidance. If you're satisfied, well then you know this is your stuff. You know it clearer than I do. But I don't see that it's clear enough yet.
Thank you, David. Your timing is immaculate. You've just reached your 5 minutes in your last word. We'll just check for questions. I've got Councillor Quacks and then Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, thank you, David.
This about shopping.
Yeah, thank you.
Waxing. So I'd be asking that question.
Look, are you aware of the stage 2 of the Amity project between the Pakuranga Road and the Panmure rail station, where the plan is to remove one lane of private vehicular traffic in each direction and replace it with a bus lane, cycling and walking? And when you ask Auckland Transport, where in the world can they demonstrate that removing a lane of traffic or 2 lanes of traffic on a busy urban road like Pakuranga Road, anywhere in the world, can they demonstrate that that actually reduces congestion rather than increasing congestion? And they don't have an answer, and they don't know that, apart from the fact that they will tell you it will increase the production ability of the traffic corridor. And those kind of meaningless statements are all too frequent.
Sorry, Councillor Quacks, could you come to the question, please?
I did. I asked him if he was aware of that, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
I think we've got the question. Thank you very much, David Hopkins.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am aware of that, and I'm also aware, as you very well are, of the difficulty of people coming out of that part of Auckland to join in with, you know, work and other activities, and it hurts actually. Yeah, it's just so much congestion. The specifics of the lane change, I think that's another level that it's not appropriate from my point of view for me to get into now, but I am aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to be a bit naughty too. Are you aware that you articulated exactly my concerns around how the statement of intent shows? I mean, for example, do you think this is good for public consumption or for people to be able to actually understand, you know, what AT are doing? For example, improve effectiveness operating expenditure. Basically, it's program for achieving efficiency targets. What does that mean? You know, transform public transport in Westgate by building a bus station. You know, how does that actually show us that we're going to deliver the kinds of congestion-freeing type activities? So I suppose that's what I want to know is, you know, just really you've hit the nail on the head. And, you know, How did you know that, David? How did you know that? That's exactly what I'm thinking.
These are very strained efforts to turn statements into questions,
I
but
think I
David.
don't want to waste the effort that David's made, actually.
David, would you like to comment in response, please?
Thank you, Councillor Cooper and Mayor. This is evidence of your expertise. You know, hey, you know this stuff. I didn't make this up. You know this. I'm just saying, please take the time to just think about it. And is this really, because I know you've got a big agenda and, you know, a lot of work's already gone into this stage, and I don't want to take away from that. But is this the best we can do at this stage? I'm asking for better.
Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. David, thank you for your advocacy, and thank you also for recognising commercial traffic sometimes gets left behind in the furore with PT, cycling and walking, which are all important, so we need the mixture. So my question is simply, your advocacy here about the statements of intent for Auckland Transport are important, but also we have Kiwi Rail and NZTA. Do you advocate equally to them for lifting their game as well?
I do, but I haven't been to Parliament to speak. I mean, yes, you know, we definitely need that third line on the south, and we certainly need the NZTA to, well, you know the work that they're doing on the various motorways, and that lane phasing has a massive effect. They talk about integrating the one network, but by heavens, that's creating a lot of congestion down across all sorts of roads across Auckland, and one wonders if that, again, is the best that could be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, just to remind you, we have got this as the next item on the agenda, so please don't use this as a rehearsal for what you're going to say in the next item. I've got 3 last questions from Councillors Simpson, Mike Lee and Councillor Newman. So could I please try and get you to make it into a question? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. David, look, I don't know you at all, but I commend you for what you're saying, and I believe it's what Auckland is saying. But have you ever looked at any other statement of intents Council has made with Auckland Transport before? So my question to you is, what has made you come this time? It's amazing.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Yes, I have, and previously I've let it go. I have looked at it because it just doesn't sing for me in the past. The wording is so similar in this one as to be, I couldn't pick the difference from the last time. And from previous times, I did believe that David Warburton made a presentation to council elected members saying that, you know, people were a big part of, you know, their success, and so that was back in the second term, and so I was expecting that sort of flavour to come in more clearly into this, but it wasn't, and I was disappointed. And the reason that I've come today is because people are just saying, you know, it's just driving them up the wall, and do they take annual leave on Friday afternoon because the traffic's just so terrible, or what do they, you know, and I don't know what I can do, but, you know, you folks have got, you know, the mana to be able to do something, perhaps.
I can assure you he's been in constant contact and monitoring this for a very long time.
Yes.
I know where he lives.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mike Lee, question, please.
It's partially rhetorical, so I think we'll keep it to the next item if you wait. Well,
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And I've got finally Councillor Newman.
Thank you, David, my near neighbour in Wattle Downs. Good to see my constituent here. Do I take it from your perspective that would it be fair to say you consider the approach to these statements of intents have been overly driven by AT as the road controlling authority rather than Auckland Council as the shareholder?
If I want this is a draft. I don't know who's worked on it, and again, there's a lot of expertise. I believe AT knows a heck of a lot about this subject that's not reflected in this document. So I'm not taking away from AT's expertise, but I believe this is Auckland Council's chance to say, this is what we expect. And, you know, whoever's prepared it, that's great, they've done their best, but, you know, all of us, I've taken the trouble to come in and voice, you know, what you know already, really. Yeah, it's a clever
Thank you.
answer.
Councillor Sayers promised to make his comment a question and to keep it brief.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I will. David, I don't know your background, but you've obviously, you know, studied this and taken some interest in it. So, I was just curious, my question is, have you any knowledge about more compact cities being more congested cities versus, perhaps less compact cities being less congested? Is there any reports along those lines that you might be able to steer me in the right direction to have a look at?
The short answer is no. I haven't lived in those cities, and most of my work's been focused on this city, including the beautiful area where you live as well. Yeah.
Councillor Sayers will send you some reports.
Thank you very much, David. Look, I can assure you I doubt that there's a councillor around this table that doesn't share your concerns. I know that there's a couple of us coming from the south that, even travelling off-peak, early hour and later in the evening, spend an hour in each way to get to and from work. That is a cause of frustration and a loss of personal time and a loss of productivity. The next item that we have on the agenda will be of interest to you. I think Auckland Transport is the fourth item on the agenda, but you can see online the paper that we are considering that makes many of the points that you've just made, saying the statement of intent, this is from council back to AT, should be more forward-looking and more comprehensively respond to the challenges, needs to outline more clearly the context and the key transport challenges. We need a clear sense of for the public of where the money to be spent is required. We need a clearer depiction of the total transport budget. So that need for greater clarity is something that we will be discussing in a few moments, that we do need back, and Auckland Transport come back to us having received our comments, and hopefully we'll take on board what we're saying and indeed what you've come along to say today. So I hope that gives you some satisfaction. So I'll move that we receive the presentation from David Hopkins regarding the clarity of the draft statement of intent for Auckland Transport, and to thank you for your attendance. I have a seconder for that, Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
Thanks,
Carried.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Right, the next item on the agenda is local board input, and there has been no input from the local board. Item number 8, extraordinary items. None have been provided to council. Item number 9, notice of motion. We have received none. And we come now to, I think, what will be our biggest paper for discussion today, which is the shareholder comment on the draft statements of intent for the substantive council-controlled organisations. So if I can welcome to the table Edward Siddle, our Principal Advisor, and Alistair Cameron, Manager of CCO Governance and External Partnerships. Can I just say a couple of words at the beginning, particularly for those who, like me, are new to this process. What we have got in front of us today are draft statements of intent, not final statements of intent. And they are in response to the letter of expectations that I sent to each of the CCO chairs in December last year. Staff have gone through and done a detailed check of the statements of intent, and they have made in the paper before you some of their recommendations about how the statements of intent need to be sharpened up. These need to be with the chairs of the boards under legislation, I think, by Sunday, which means that I will need to work on that with the chair of the Finance Committee and in consultation with some of the other chairs tomorrow afternoon. So the suggestions that you make today, we will endeavour to incorporate in our staff comments that are in the paper before you. We send those back to the CCOs. They then present by June their final statement of intent, but then that is subject to amendment by us, and we are able unilaterally at the end of that process to change the statement of intent if we believe that the CCOs have not responded in an adequate form to the suggestions that we have made to them. These are important because they outline the intentions and activities for the coming year. They are an opportunity for us to influence direction, and they do provide the basis for accountability. But when we make these suggestions, please keep in mind when you speak to them that it is about the statement of intent. It's not about delving into the details, and it's not about promoting policies that council might not yet have agreed on. This is to try to get some clarity and some substance into the statements of intent so that the boards are working to our plan and are accountable to us. So those are my preliminary comments, but Alistair or Edward, you might like to lead off. I think if we go in alphabetical order through each of the CCOs, pause at the end of them, and then we'll have the opportunity to handle them one at a time. If we do them all together, we'll get lost in the jumble. So Edward, please, maybe you'd like to start off with any general comments and then perhaps focus in on ACIL, the first of the CCOs.
That's great. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Just to add to what the Mayor said in introduction, I'd just like to note that the final SOIs also need to align with the annual plan. That process is also going on at the moment. And so some of the suggestions you might have will need to ensure that those two processes are aligned. The other thing that there are a few comments about is in respect of targets in some of the statements of intent. A lot of those targets are going to be subject to revision through the long-term plan, which is processed later in the year. So we'll have a wider opportunity to look at whether we're measuring the right things. So with that in mind, we'll get on to ACIL. Just some short comments about the Auckland Council Investments Limited draft statement of intent. What we're asking for in general terms is more information about the relationship with ACIL's subsidiaries and how ACIL can influence and drive alignment with council policy. Additionally, more commentary on financial figures and why the targets why the targets are as they are would be good, just for public transparency. So happy to take any comments.
Right, we'll begin with Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Alistair and Edward. As far as ACIL is concerned, my comments relate to Auckland International Airport Limited, and my view would be to encourage our investment arm to have Auckland International Airport Limited be more collaborative in its approaches to transport, particularly with NZTA and AT, in promoting better movement of people in the airport, and especially public transport. And I know that's a greater degree of specificity than what's in there at the moment, but I think it's an area that's needed as real focus.
Comments back on that? I think it's a point that's well made. Part of the congestion problem is within the AIAL precinct, and I think a comment along those lines would match with statements of intention, but I'm interested in your response to that.
Mr Mayor, no, I think we can include something along those lines, just noting that it would be an advocacy role given the level of our shareholding, but
that's what I said,
we
influence advocacy, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Councillor Mike Lee, Councillor then Chris Darby.
It's a very pertinent point. However, this council group has to provide better leadership to the airport. Currently, what we're offering the airport is buses from 2024, known as mass transit. I think the point is well made, but we have dropped the ball when it comes to providing leadership. I think we need to do some work on that before we put pressure on the airport, because we're in a circular argument. They will say, well, what do you advise? And what we've advised so far is rubbish.
Okay, now what I think, if we start off with questions, do the normal thing, I think start off with questions and then come back with comments might be the easier way to go. I was going to run the two of them together, but there may be a difficulty in that. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Probably repeating something that some of us had a discussion about yesterday, was about our weak shareholding, even though it's a substantial shareholding of 22.4 in the airport, and the next shareholder is at 1.89. How through the SOI might we ask our CCO, or Council Investments, to investigate exploring a firmer expression of our shareholding in the airport company, e.g. Seeking a board position for the 22.4% shareholding. How could we do that through the SOI?
Fortunately, I've just had a draft resolution stuck under my nose, that may be coming from another member of the committee, but I think the issue is around ACIL coming to you and giving you advice on how to do those things, so that we need to be clear what the implications are and also what we want and hope to achieve. So my suggestion would be to have something in the statement of intent to ask ACIL to come back to council with advice relating to its shareholdings in Auckland International Airport, including how to increase council's influence if so desired.
Okay, so just to be clear, to come back when? We're talking about the finalisation in a few months' time. Are you talking outside this process or within this process?
LTP.
Yeah, probably LTP. I mean, the big issue is what do you want to achieve with having a director on the board, and what do you want to achieve as shareholders? And until we're clear about that, there's not a lot of point in telling ACIL to do anything. We need to be clear as the ultimate shareholder what we want ACIL to be advocating for or doing in their role.
One opportunity that the council has is there is a workshop scheduled with ACIL in August, so that would provide an opportunity for that to happen.
Can I just formally put on the table the resolution, which I should have done at the beginning. So I will move that we approve the comments made in the document in front of us, agree that the Mayor, I think and it should be rather than or, the Chair of Finance and Performance finalise the letters, and to agree that the Manager of CCO Governance works with the relevant local boards for shareholder comments. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Simpson. The question in relation to the issue that Councillor Darby has just brought up is shareholding is an interesting question that we have to address, but I'm not quite sure that this becomes incorporated in a statement of intent, does it? Can I have your feedback on that, Alistair?
Look, I think it's probably a discussion for the LTP process, because ultimately that's where you'll be making your decisions about what you want from that shareholding. I think what you'd be looking for from ACIL is to be actively supporting you in the LTP process, bringing you advice about your shareholding in that process. Whether you want to include in the statement of intent a commitment from ACIL to work with you in the LTP process, or you're confident that they will do so, but I think the issue here is being clear with ACIL what advice you want in the LTP process. It doesn't necessarily need to be included in the statement of intent.
Yeah. So just right at the beginning of this process, if we keep in mind, I mean, I know it's a kind of an invitation when we go through all of our CCOs to put in ideas, and many of them have a lot of merit, like I think that idea has, but we've got to make sure that what we're asking to put in the statement of intent is appropriate to be in there. So, yeah, well, it doesn't hurt to have the discussion, but I think we do need to focus on what needs to go into the statement of intent. Councillor Clow.
Well, I have foreshadowed a motion that's up there which relates to ACIL, and I suppose we just need some clarification. If we're making changes, I mean, do we do those through adding extra recommendations, or does point A, approve the proposed shareholder comments contained in the report? Do we effectively put amendments into the comments that follow?
I think what we're doing, I don't think in the past, as I understand the advice I've received, that it's been by way of moving recommendations. It's raising points that need to be incorporated. I'm making a note of those comments. You need to be as well as on the final editorial board, and I know that Alistair and Edward would be as well. So if we do it by way of recommendation, it's a bit more clunky. I think it's just make the points clearly about what you think needs to be incorporated, and that in turn becomes incorporated in a letter, a formal a formal letter back to each of the CCOs. They've seen the draft comments, so we'll be sending them final comments that will incorporate the views of the elected representatives. So I think making the point and incorporating them in the letter rather than a formal recommendation.
I'd still like the recommendation put up, even if we don't do it, so people know what I'm trying to achieve here.
Yep.
And I'm happy to speak to it. Has it been typed up?
Yep.
Could go up on the screen. Because to be quite honest, I feel as though we're just beating around the bush when it comes to ACIL. I mean, some of us would argue, why do we even have it? Because what do we do? What is it doing? So if you look in page 14 of the attachments, you know, for Auckland Airport, we're asking them to work on the council's green gas emissions target and Maori economic and social wellbeing. And we're asking them to support the Auckland plan where it's appropriate. That's all we're asking them to do. We're asking ACIL to do those three things. It's quite pathetic.
Just pathetic.
It's just pathetic. We're 22% shareholder of the airport. We're proposing to put light rail. It was a hasty move where the airport came back and said, we're making some plans. You need to decide whether it's heavy rail or light rail. And so we go bing, 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 and we go light rail, and we don't want to get into that argument. But the bottom line is we're delivering light rail right to the terminal at our cost to enhance the value of the Auckland Airport shares, which of course we have some of. But that's public enhancement of 80% of the shareholding, which is the other 80%. And we've just got no influence. We're not even really trying to have any influence over the airport to get them to do things that are for the greater good of Auckland. However, we do ask them to support the Auckland plan where it's appropriate to. It's very, very, we're weak. And I'm not going to get too much into the ports of Auckland, but the bottom line is it's not a heck of a lot stronger for the ports of Auckland. There's a few more points there. There's about 10 of them as compared to 3. Provide guidance to the ports of... So we're asking the investment company to provide guidance to the ports of Auckland as to the long-term interests of the region and the economy. We're not even providing guidance to Auckland, to ACIL. And they're supposed to provide guidance on our direction, but we're not telling them anything. We all agree that we would never sell the land at the port. So I'd say, why are we not looking at separating the land and safeguarding the damn land for the, from the actual port operations? Needless to say, we're not even really asking them, ACIL, to ensure that the ports of Auckland don't make some precipitous investment decisions going forward when it could be a 40 or 50-year investment decision they make, and we're out of there in 25 years, and we're halfway through depreciating the asset.
Point of order.
So I'm just saying
Point
it's
of order.
weak.
Point of order, Councillor Lee.
Councillor Clow has raised the issue of, in effect, selling the Ports of Auckland operational business. I don't think that's appropriate for the statement of intent.
Yep.
You can raise it in another forum, but it's totally inappropriate to be raising it in a statement of intent.
Yeah,
Point of order.
I think that's
no
close
point
to a
of order.
debating point. But can I just intervene before I invite Councillor Clow to finish? I don't think in statements of intent we can make major policy changes on the basis of something that hasn't been the subject of full consideration. And if you were hypothetically to do something along those lines, then clearly it would need to be, it would be a major decision. It would need to be closely debated and focused on a specific paper. So we've got to be careful that we don't throw ideas into a statement of intent. These are what we want to direct the CCO to do where we're able to. We can direct the port more directly than we are the airport, because we're a 22% shareholder, not a 100% shareholder. But having said that, I think that the criticisms that have been made are criticisms that I would share, that we need something more than just talking about carbon emissions and responsiveness to iwi in a statement of intent. So I'm happy to have your resolution as a way for us to take into consideration for including in the report to the CCO concerned. Councillor Kai, if you'd like to finish.
Well, firstly, you can re-roll the tape, it's there. I never said anything about selling the ports. I never said anything about that at all. I just said that we should be looking at separating the land from the business. That's all I said. All right? And going forward, because we may keep the port, I hope we do keep the port, but it could be moving away from there in 25 years. We should be ensuring that we're having a bit more direction, and I'm sorry, this is not the statement of intent, the letters, it's just not strong enough.
Yep.
It's just not strong enough, that's where I'm coming from.
Yep. Okay, so that amendment has been moved and seconded, so at this point we now are discussing the amendment. So if anybody wants, I've got councillors that have requested a chance to speak, but I think we deal with the amendment first.
Well, I had my hand up. I can speak to both, actually.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
As Councillor Darby said, to a degree, I think what we're seeing is the regurgitating the workshop that we had yesterday. And Alistair, I put it to you that we've got quite a complicated process we have to go through with the statutory framework that we're in. So, on the one hand, we're wanting to optimise the investments that Council has, but we're also wanting to mandate the directors of our various CCOs to be giving us good strategic advice, and that we can align that so that when we come to the LTP, we're better informed to know the questions that we actually want to ask when we go out for consultation. So by dealing with all of these in little bits of isolation, it makes it really hard to bring the whole picture together. So as the Mayor has correctly said, we don't want to be writing this, and I'm loath to see amendments coming up, because it's going to become a bit tortuous that we finally get to what we want. What we're wanting from you is perhaps some guidance on how we can better express the need to say we want to be more assertive in the investments that we have and the control that we can potentially exercise for the future to give better outcomes for Aucklanders. So rather than getting into a debate about privatisation or not, how can we then go out, even if you wanted to have that debate with the LTP, how can you go out when you actually don't know the questions that you wanted to ask? For instance, with the airport company, the challenge I put to the officers yesterday was, if we didn't have the shareholding in the airport, how could we better exercise control over that whole precinct? Why was it that we actually didn't look at a targeted rate for the airport? Why didn't we do any number of things? And I know that we've got some excellent directors on the board of this particular CCO, but we're not mandating them, and that's really what the nub of the problem is here at the moment. We don't believe we've given them sufficient scope to come back to us with frank advice on how we might better manage it. But if the objective is for whether it's the investments or Auckland Transport or any one of the CCOs, how can we actually get more bangs for our bucks? And is the accountability solely with those directors, or does it lie with Stephen Town also and the staff of the Auckland Council? So we're wanting to get better policy advice, and I think that's where Councillor Clow is coming from with his amendment. But I'm loath to support it right at the moment unless we could incorporate it somehow better. And you are a better wordsmith than ourselves, so we would like to hear from you on how we could achieve this objective more gracefully.
I think that's a point well made. I absolutely support the intent of the amendment, but and I think Councillor Lee, Mike Lee, reacted to it by saying it felt like this was, are we going to look at privatisation? I don't think that's the intent of...
I think it's Councillor Clo's intent, Mr Mayor.
Well, sorry. Let me. Please.
made no secret of
I'm
that.
on my feet. I don't need it. I don't need additional advice at this point. But I think if we could get some greater clarity around that, Councillor, what you're trying to do, as I understand it, is work out how we can use our position as a shareholder to better influence some of the outcomes that come from the company. Can I maybe ask Alistair to wordsmith it a little in association with Councillor Clow and Darby? I think we can get a position that we would all agree with rather than it being a potential divisive motion and people not being quite clear what it's intended to do. So can I mean, I could play around with myself, but...
maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but...
Mr Chairman, might I suggest, if there is a willingness of the council to give consideration to this, that we go through perhaps some of the SOIs and give these very good officers the opportunity to actually frame something, so in an hour's time or something we can put something up that might meet these objectives?
I think if we can temporarily withdraw the resolution is probably the way that we have to do it, so that we can get the appropriate wording and then come back to it. Can I suggest that to Councillor Clow and Darby?
I will point out I got Alistair to write it for me. I added a few extra words, but it was written by Alistair and Eddie in the first place.
I think what I'm suggesting is if we just withdraw it, we can get some greater clarity around it and still get the intent, but without the uncertainty as to what it's intended to do. So are you happy to do that, Councillor Clow? It just allows us to continue with a broader discussion on ACIL, and we can do it without a pressure of time.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and you're happy with that, Councillor Darby. Right, I now have Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. I just want to ask some questions and perhaps get through the statement of intent, perhaps get a little bit more clarity and a little more focus on some of these issues around the film studio. On page 15, we talk about monitoring the performance of AFSL through the review of KPIs, including a target of achieving a occupancy ratio of 37.5% for screen. Now, I just want you to clarify this for me, but does that mean that right now, or our goal is that two-thirds of the time that studio would not be used for its intended purpose?
Yes, that is the goal at present. And I guess we should just clarify by saying that that's an average, which doesn't make it sound a lot better, but the film studio is very much a feast or famine asset, that it's either 100% occupied for a period of time or it sits there empty waiting for the next production.
Well, it seems extraordinary that we're involved in an investment or is being invested in on our behalf. The film studio or any commercial enterprise which is only used commercially for a third of the time, and I think we should be a little bit more directive around that and ask them to increase that to make closer to what any business would see as being prudent. I couldn't imagine why would we be involved in an enterprise which for two-thirds of the time stands idle.
I think there's a couple of points there. The first point I'd probably make that from a pure financial return point of view, well, that's not the rationale for holding the film studio. The film studio's role is more of one of economic development and the jobs that is created around having that facility out West Auckland. That was the original rationale for having that. Edward might like to make some comments.
The other comment I'd like to make is that there are some wider questions about the film studios, and those will be coming to council in the near future.
Yeah, okay. Well,
So
that
we
would
will
be,
have that opportunity.
that would be good, and that's why pretty much I support what Councillor Clode has put up, because that's a bit of a catch-all. Because I sort of wonder, the economic development part of it seems rather a thin excuse to be involved in this enterprise, which is for 2/3 of the time totally idle and not achieving anything.
If I could just comment to that, Mr. Mayor, I think this is probably the same discussion as we've been having around ports and the airports, that you as a council need to receive some advice about the film studio, the ports, the airports, so that you can make some policy decisions, so that you can then inform ACIL what you want to do with those investments. If the ACIL statement of intent looks a bit thin and that we're not directing them to do very much, that's because as a council we have not made many decisions about what we would like them to do.
So, Mr. Mayor, look,
And
I know it's been taken down.
I think that's a fair point.
I know
Councillor
it's been taken. I know Councillor Close's recommendation has been taken down, but you know, for nothing else, I would support it. Just to have a run over some of these investments that we're involved in.
Yep. If you finish, Councillor Quacks, I think the issues that are being brought up are valid issues for debate, but we can't resolve things like the future of the film studio or whether you separate the land and the operations of the port when we're simply advising on statements of intent. We need to do, if council is of a mind to do that, then it needs a specific paper setting out the pros and cons, the advantages, the disadvantages, the difficulties that may be encountered in adopting a particular option. So that is open for council to do as a shareholder, but we can't do it within the context of a statement of intent. But we're just working on that resolution to try to...
May I finish then, Mr.
Yep,
Mayor?
please, Councillor Quacks.
Is it reasonable then that this council determines that 37.5% occupancy is too low and we can set another target? This target seems to have been set by either the film studio through ACIL or by ACIL themselves. And if that's, it just seems extraordinary that we would allow an investment to stand idle for 2/3 of the time, and maybe we should be asking to flip that on its head. That in fact, they aim for they target, and that's what we're asking for, a target of say 60% or 70% occupancy for the film studio. Not 37.5.
I think it would be a valid way to go, and we could incorporate this into the document, asking them why they haven't increased the target above that level. Now, I don't know what the usual occupancy of a film studio is at. I do know that this breaks even but doesn't make a lot of money in response to the investment, the reasonably limited investment we make in it. But that is a valid question to ask of them, as why they haven't incorporated into their statement of intent a higher target than the 38%. So we could take that on board, Councillor Quacks. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got two questions. One around the point that Councillor Fletcher made, which I don't think's answered. I support Councillor Close's resolution, but I thought you had said at the beginning of the meeting that we were going to note down the points that councillors made that we agreed on, and then you two were going to work on that and it come back. So are we changing that? Are we looking for resolutions every time?
That's my preferred approach, but there's nothing to stop a councillor understanding orders moving a resolution. I think that we can tie ourselves up in knots if we debate the specific wording of resolutions, and I would prefer to have it by way of this is our suggestion as to what should be incorporated, leaving it to Councillor Clowe and myself, maybe in consultation with the relevant chair and deputy chair of the committee dealing with the CCO. That would be my preferred approach.
So to that end, Your Worship, would you not sort of canvass that view around the table first? Because, or else we're going to have this
Yep.
understanding orders, we're going to have this all the way through today. So that was my first question. I have a second question as well, and that is specifically on, this is to you, Alistair, specifically on performance targets, because I think at the end of the day, we want a lot of transparency around performance targets for our CCOs. Now, I understand that we can't add financial targets. Can you just clarify if that's correct? Can we, or can we not add financial targets in our statement of intent? And if we, whatever that answer is, can we add percentage targets as far as performance targets go?
Yes, we can add financial targets. I'll add the rider that they should be consistent with the annual plan process and any targets that are currently in either the or in the long-term plan. So if we've already set a financial target in the long-term plan, then we should keep the targets consistent in the statement of intent.
Right. Okay, thank you. I've got that. Yep. So going back to my
That's answered the second question. On the first question, can I just get a sense of councillors, because we could spend a very long time moving a series of resolutions and without notice, not necessarily well worded, etc. It would be my preference, if you have confidence in the chairs of the committee, the standing committees, the deputy mayor, deputy chairs and myself, just to liaise on trying to incorporate the sense of the issues that are raised by councillors where we discern that there is a reasonable level of support for that. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Lee?
Yes, I agree, Mr Mayor. The problem is that we're dealing with a mechanism of statements of intent, which is our only real formal means as the governing body to influence the CCOs that we own, which are wide and varied. Some are very, very important, and some, and the one Councillor Quacks refers to, not so important, not so relevant to the work of a council. Many of these CCOs were directly managed or overseen or governed by councils in the past. They now have boards of directors, and so they are insulated from political and public control by those boards of directors to a large degree. And so the statement of intent is the only way that there can be public political influence over them. My concern is there's a sentiment from some of the members that we need to show more control. The airport was mentioned as an example, probably even more germane as Auckland Transport. But we cannot control or show leadership, moral or any other form of leadership, unless we know what we are doing, unless we know what we want. And I think, I agree with you, Mr Mayor, that it's wrong at this stage of the game to try and make major strategic changes to a CCO via a statement of intent. Statements of intent are largely written by the CCOs themselves. I can tell you as a director of a CCO for the last 6 years, that's how the game works. The council will come back and ask for a longer mihi-mihi, or more emphasis on Maori well-being, but not much else. Not much else because...
Mike, could I just please interrupt at the moment, Councillor Lee? I'm sorry. I just want to focus on how we handle it first, rather than going into some of those issues. So I just need some sense from all of the councillors about whether you want...
Hang on, I want to get to it first. I'm going to tell you how we're going to...
Could you please come to it?
What I suggest, Mr Mayor, is that after we go through this process, we do start getting focus on our role as governors when it comes to CCOs, and have day-long workshops working through the CCOs and what our strategic position is in regard to aspects of Auckland Transport, Auckland Airport, the ports of Auckland, whatever, and work through it seriously that way and come up with a strategic approach, not just a little in-group of your chairs and deputy chairs, Mr Mayor, with due respect. We all can contribute, we all have experience to offer. And I suggest that is the way we approach it after this process is over.
I understand the point you're making. I think there's some validity in that if you want to look at the how we influence the strategic direction. At this stage, I want to focus specifically on how we deal with the message we send back to each CCO on the statement of intent that they have drafted and that we have officials' comments on, and I want to know what other comments we need to add into that. Now, I think it would be easier to deal with it by getting a sense of where council is at rather than moving a series of recommendations. But I need you as councillors to determine how you want to proceed on that. Could I just have comments on it? Are you happy for the process to be raise the point, debate the point? We can take it on board, the officials can take it on board, and we'll come up with a document that will be sent tomorrow. This is not the last step in the process. The last step in the process is when they come back with their redrafted statements of intent, and I think I want to look very carefully at how we manage that so that if we want to change those last ones, then we need notices before the day on notice that are properly thought through and worked out. But for now, I'm suggesting that we do it rather more informally. It's the first step in the feedback to them, but if there are contrary viewpoints to that, please let me know. It's in your hands. Councillor Simpson.
I'd like to speak to that, Your Worship, because I think there's a couple of things. Whilst you can have a resolution, the bottom line is it's not the resolution that's being responded to. It's actually transcribed into words in the statement of intent. So the key is not actually in the wordsmith of the resolution, it's actually what the resolution wants to put forward. So I would suggest that you said right at the very beginning that you and Councillor Clow should note the points down as we go through them. I think what we could do is put up on the screen the points that people are agreeing should go into the statement of intent. So they're not actually a resolution, but they're actually the key issues, and it'll be those key points that are written, maybe not just in one line, they might be written in different ways, and I think that's where our staff need to get involved and transcribe the intent, the intent of our statement of intent into the actual document itself. I don't think you are casualising this by not using resolutions. I think you're merely creating a list of issues that as a council we believe are important, and giving those issues to the staff to add by way of their wordsmiths into the statement of intent, of which you and Councillor Clow as Chair of Finance will sign off, but also you'll have involvement by the chairs and deputies as well. So, and all councillors will have a copy of that. So I don't think you're minimalising it. I think you're just making it a simpler process with the points that we all agree on.
Thank you.
And the other thing I just want to say, we did have a workshop around this, and it's a pity not all councillors were present when we discussed it.
Yep. Thank you. That's precisely the intent of what I want to do. But I'm asking if there is any opposition to proceeding in the way that I've explained and Councillor Simpson supported. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Not opposition at all, sir. I'm just going to support the process that you're putting forward. Otherwise, we will end up having a list of pluses and minuses that will end up with nowhere. So we need to just put up councillors' viewpoints. It's noted by staff, and then it needs to be consolidated down with the intricacies and dependencies of these different SOIs have. You can't just put in sentences to make it won't add up correctly.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely correct. Are there any further comments on that? If there are no further comments, that's the way that we will then proceed. Sorry, Councillor Clow.
I put up a resolution and have a seconder for it, and I don't have any other resolutions, I only just had that one, because I've been on this council now for 4 years. Seems a lot of frustration over the airport and the ports with us having no say. I mean, we had a huge debacle over the ports of Auckland, and the bottom line is, and you even on your campaign trail, I'll tell them what to do, or I'll change the directors. This is mild. This is very mild, but we're just trying to get a bit more
disagree with that,
influence
though.
over those entities, and these are different entities. This is not Watercare, which is a 100% infrastructure company. It's not Auckland Transport, which is a 100% infrastructure company. This is something where we actually have some real investments, liquid investments over time.
Councillor, we discussed this yesterday, and you know that I agree with you. So it's not a case of disagreeing, it's a case of processes about how we incorporate that into it, and you will have a particular role as the Chair of Finance and Performance in helping draft that final comment. So I take on board what you're saying. There's, I think, quite a lot of agreement around the table with those that understand what you're trying to do. I'm simply looking at process so we can get through this exercise effectively and efficiently and strengthen what our officials have already commented on the adequacy or otherwise of the statements of intent. So,
Okay, so I'll agree. I'll withdraw the motion unless Councillor Darby wants to continue. We'll just withdraw it. Hey, can I move on and comment on something else?
Before you do that, I just want to make sure that everybody, all those in favour of proceeding in the way that I've moved, I'll move it that we proceed in that way. Seconded by Councillor Simpson.
Where's the resolution?
Okay. Well,
we want to see it.
Okay, let's draft the resolution that that the comments made by councillors are recorded and will be worked through by the Mayor and the Chair of Finance and Performance in consultation with others to be incorporated in the final response or the response, not the final, the response to CCOs on their draft statements of intent.
The agreed
Yep.
agreed comments, not just any, everybody.
Now, I'm aware that probably our typist got lost along the way there, but let's have...
With the purpose of optimising the investments of Auckland Council.
But that's on that specific topic. This is just
I know,
a process.
I realise the process, we're agreeing, but the process is about optimising the investment. That must not get lost.
That is absolutely right about that, but it may not apply to some of the other CCOs in exactly the same way. So let's just get that up on the board. So I've got it formally.
Councillor Simpson.
Mr Chairman, while that's being drafted, I wonder if Alistair might be allowed now to answer the question that I posed to him earlier about how we might better prepare ourselves in terms of useful information in anticipation of the LTP. He's had a moment or two to think about it. I just wonder if he'd like to respond to that.
Alistair, take as long as it will take to get this resolution up.
I'll time it perfectly with Elaine. Look,
So was I.
it is one of the issues around the LTP and the statement of intent process not running together. One of the things that we as staff have done to try to get you the advice that you need is to put in place a series of workshops with the CCOs so that you can discuss those strategic issues. I guess what we'd be looking from you as councillors is direction as to what you actually see as the big issues that you need some advice on, but to your point, you don't know what you don't know. So, look, it is something that we're trying to address through those workshops. I think there's perhaps an opportunity here for the chairs of the committees of the whole, which have the CCOs reporting into them, to take soundings from their colleagues and lead the policy discussions that you all think are important, and actually drive it from those committees. What are the things that you want to change? What are the things that you need advice on? And then have the CCO supporting you in that decision-making process. Probably the other comment that I'd make is that the boards of the CCOs contain a fantastic amount of information that could inform the LTP process. And an observation on the previous LTP processes I've been involved in, the boards perhaps have been a resource that haven't been used as much as they could. And how you utilise them, that's a greater mind than mine will figure that out, but I think that is something that should be tapped into during the upcoming LTP. So look, I think it's you as councillors letting us as an organisation know what are your strategic priorities, and then we can shape our advice around that. That answer your question?
Thank you very much. We've
It's
now
a conversation, we'll continue it.
Yeah, in another place. Okay, so the resolution reads as follow. Agree that the agreed comments made by councillors are recorded and that the Mayor and chairs of the relevant committees of the whole subsequently work together to incorporate these comments in the council's response to the CCOs, which means that the chairs will need to free themselves up tomorrow afternoon because the deadline will be effectively tomorrow night at close of play. So it's been moved by myself, it's been seconded by Councillor Simpson. Everybody happy about that, Councillor Mike Lee?
Can I just pick up on the comment from the officer? When I said that we need, before we start changing the statement of intent in any significant way, that we need to have strategic positions vis-a-vis certain CCOs, and we should work through these at a workshop. I didn't mean working with the boards of the CCOs. We need to have our corporate position first, because they certainly have theirs. So we need to come up with a coherent position. It may be quite different, it may not.
I'm sorry. I'm just
Sorry
wanting
again?
if there's any further discussion on the resolution that's been moved and seconded here.
It's very hard to say anything in this chamber, Mr. Mayor. You keep interrupting me all the time.
Because I need to keep
He's the mayor.
everyone in council on track on the process we need to follow so we can make
That's
progress.
not how a democratic
Okay.
body works.
It's
Mr.
been
Mayor.
moved and seconded, so I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. Can we? We are now back on the main ACIL recommendations, and those. Is there anyone that hasn't spoken that would like the opportunity to do so?
Are we just still on ACIL? I'm quite
ACIL,
confused, thank you.
yeah, that's right, and we need to make much more
Not blaming
progress if
you,
we're going to
Mr.
get through. Councillor Clough.
I haven't spoken because I've only spoken to an amendment which I've subsequently withdrawn. Point number 22, which is in the next section, but bear with me. The second sentence there. In addition, AT should ensure the statement of intent is forward-looking, as some sections report on past success. You need to add a word rather than identifying and pursuing emerging issues and opportunities. Should that be something that should be over in proposed shareholder comments applicable to all CCOs? Because, I mean, we're trying to go forward here. We don't really want to have a history lesson all the damn time. You know, we really need to be talking about forward thinking, forward planning. How can we clean up the transport mess, the water mess, you know, whatever. It's no point recounting history about we've underinvested and oh dear. So is that something that should be incorporated in a positive way to all of the CCOs?
I think that if you look through the document that we have in front of us, you will see from time to time CCOs, including ATEED, have been, they've had it suggested to them that they need to cut the detail and the history lessons and look in a more forward-looking way. So I think that point you're making is relevant, and that will be taken on board in relation to our comments. Okay, any further discussion?
All CCOs is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, it applies equally, I think, across all of them. Okay, if there are no further...
A very small technical point.
Councillor Fletcher.
Could I just ask Alistair, we all know that public notification is changing and the needs of the community change. Where board meetings will be advertised on the council's website through the public notices of the New Zealand Herald, why just the New Zealand Herald? I mean, most of my constituents probably just get, a lot of them just get the local newspapers. Could you give me some advice on why New Zealand Herald?
That's ACIL's choice. We just require them to publicly notify their meetings. How they choose to do that's up to them, but we can discuss that with them if it's on our website.
I just think it's something that we need to be thinking about for the future, so just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Suggest that we now move on to the second of our CCOs, Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development. Edward, can you make some preliminary comments on that?
Yes, the ATEED draft statement of intent, as was just discussed, is very detailed, and we're urging them to focus on the future rather than their past successes. We'd like a clearer statement of ATEED's role and contribution to Auckland's economic success, a stronger commitment to cooperate within the council group, and also be clearer about how ATEED is cooperating externally, such as with central government agencies, including MFAT, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and so on. We'd like ATEED to provide increased detail about their spending in different cost categories or activity areas, and more explanation again about performance indicators and why the targets for some indicators have been set as they have.
Great, thank you very much, Edward. Are there any comments from councillors that you'd like to have incorporated into the ATEED statement of intent and our officials' comments on it?
Just
Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. I think you were at the workshop we had with ATEED, Alistair or Edward, and one of the things the chairman of their board and CEO stated was their movement towards more funding of ATEED from outside sources, and I wonder if that should be signalled in the SOI as well.
Any response on that? I see that they have absorbed the idea that if they could be funded other than by direct funding of from council, they would welcome that. But it could be built in. Discussions that I've had with ATEED build in the expectation that they become increasingly self-funding over time.
Without flicking through the 50-odd pages of ATEED's SOI, I suspect there is something in there about that, but we can definitely double-check that, Councillor.
There's a section in regard to targeted rates on accommodation, but maybe we should broaden that as an objective.
Yes, okay,
That's what
noted.
I'm getting at, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, I think good suggestion. Councillor Simpson, Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Worship. Actually, that was where I was coming from too, really. Just a signal around performance targets, highlighting that we know at the workshop they have agreed to begin looking at a self-funding model. But in this particular annual statement of intent, maybe highlighting the benefit to the residential ratepayer who contributes to what they do too. I mean, that's been a bit of a contentious issue, so...
That's a high bar to jump.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, and I apologise for not being at the workshop yesterday. I was at a board meeting all day, but I've been to many, in fact chaired most of the CCO workshops. On ATEED, I'm very keen that we do pick up on the less is more approach. It certainly is a long and historical document. However, I'm suggesting, Mr Mayor, that we don't lose the ability to explain what ATEED does, because as witnessed in the debate over the last few months, there's a chronic lack of understanding about what ATEED does out there in the real world, amongst the media and around this table. So I think we just need to have a pithy and clear explanation, because it certainly isn't all about visitor attraction. In fact, that's just a small percentage of what they do.
Yep. I think the view is more would be less in helping the clarity of that explanation. Exactly. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just want to follow up on what the comments made by the Deputy Mayor. And I do recall that in 2014, I believe, this council actually adopted a policy for seeking further commercial sponsorship. And that was, I thought, specifically aimed at ATEED. And I'm not exactly sure if they've accomplished anything under that directive from council, apart from now clearly wanting to sock it to the accommodation sector. So I don't know, this was specifically around sponsorship, naming rights and a whole bunch of different things that they could be engaged in, and I don't believe that they've really delivered on that, and perhaps, you know, I agree that if it's in the statement of intent, it should be followed up. and we need to pursue that. I also think that we need ATEED to be a lot more transparent in their spending and in terms of their outcomes, because it's kind of always lost on me exactly what ATEED have actually accomplished that couldn't have been accomplished by the business sector themselves in many cases.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the concept of commercial sponsorship is consistent with the comments made by the Deputy Mayor about greater self-funding, and I think transparency in spending and outcomes is what we need from all CCOs, but maybe in particular this one. What I find with this document, talking to officials, is that credit seems to have been taken from the growth in the visitor industry overall without trying to separate out the specific and direct impact that ATEEDers have. And I think they have had in areas. They've helped make us a destination rather than a gateway. Yep. But it tends to become, if I go back to Councillor Hulse's point, a little confused because you're talking about the macro development of the visitor industry in Auckland rather than the specific input and outcomes of ATEED activities. So I think if you could build that into your comments, there'd be some support for that. Okay, Councillor Clow.
I just want to comment, we shouldn't forget really this quite sterling job ATEED have done on economic development. I mean, we seem to focus on, you know, Adele or this or whatever, but I mean, it's economic development enhancement has been fairly successful, and from what I can gather through feedback from industry is they're pretty damn happy with what ATEED has done to help them facilitate and lead, etc., etc. So I'll just make that point.
Oh, I don't think that's...
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments from anybody? Councillor Hills?
Yes, thank you. I think just probably brief, when we're throwing out these discussions and we are talking, you know, do more with less and things, or
only providing a
target
facility,
what people do,
that's all.
Then we need to talk about what we don't want them to do. So is it the Lantern Festival? Is it Diwali? Is it the Young Enterprise Scheme? Is it Job Fest? Is it Grid Auckland? Is it Build Auckland? Is it all the other programs and things we're talking about? All their KPIs, you know, when we're discussing these things in the open, we need to discuss, we ask them to increase visitor numbers. Whether they can claim that all their own is a different story to the fact that visitor numbers have increased. Whether we, you know, all the other things around GDP and startups and negotiations they've been doing, which we've asked them to do, we need to be clear about whether we're congratulating them for doing the things we asked them to do, or we stop asking them to do that and expect either someone else do that or it doesn't happen at all. So I just think we need to be very clear about, we can keep throwing out do more with less or define what you do better, but what do we not want them to do?
Yeah.
And how do we get them to do those things?
Sending 11 people to San Francisco, that's for bloody shit.
I think that's a fair point. I haven't heard any suggestion around the table that they not do things like Diwali and Lantern Festival, which I think they do really effectively.
Perhaps they shouldn't send 11 people to San Francisco, however.
Well,
I think that's unfair, Mr. Mayor.
yeah. Okay, we won't. Let's keep our debate focused, or we won't get through the workload that we have to do today. Any further suggestions in regard to statement of intent? Okay, we'll move on, and our next one is Auckland Transport, I think, isn't it? Yep. Auckland Transport. Edward.
Thank you again. Yes, as was discussed earlier, the Auckland Transport Statement of Intent, one of our key comments is the need for it to become more future focused, with a lot more detail about the coming year's activities included, and a good example of that is in their work plan table, which is very light on what's happening in 2017, 2018. We want clearer information about where money is being spent so that the public can really understand where the money's going. And in terms of the work plan, make revisions to it to make it much clearer what the priority projects are and the different size of the projects. A An increased commitment to collaboration across the council group needs to be included, particularly in terms of projects such as the City Centre Master Plan and across the other CCOs such as Pānuku. And there's a corresponding comment in the Pānuku comments that we'll come to later. And additionally, more details to be provided on specific projects and how they'll deliver the positive outcomes for Auckland. And there's a long list of projects we've suggested in our draft comments, including in relation to the roads and streets framework, mass rapid transit, bus initiatives, rail trip times, and the cycling program.
Thank you very much, Edward. I think the comments by David Hopkins probably reflected pretty much the report you'd written. It does need to be more specific, greater clarity. I think most of us that sat around the same table that heard AT do an outline of what they were intending to do felt that that was more instructive than the statement of intent. I've had that discussion already with Auckland Transport, and I think they'll take that on board. But I'm happy for further comments. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I want to echo the comment there in relation to commitment to collaboration. I think that's very important. You've highlighted projects such as the City Centre Master Plan, but I really want to reiterate the spatial priority area work streams as well. And Your Worship, you and I have had conversations with staff from your office in relation to the spatial priority area work that's taking place in my ward, and there are decisions taken by Auckland Transport on a business case that appears to completely cut across that. Now, I'm not trying to get myself involved in micromanaging the operational decisions of a road controlling authority, but I don't see that there is a lot of complementary work streams going on if we can have business cases which completely cut across the SPAs. So I would want to see that addressed in comments back to Auckland Transport, but I would also want to see officer stewardship around Auckland Transport's activities that don't necessarily complement the SPA program, because to me the SPA work is driven out of the unitary plan, which I would have thought would be a foundation document not only for the shareholder but also for Auckland Transport as a subsidiary.
Thank you. So about prioritisation in particular.
Of the SPAs.
Yeah. Councillor Denise Lee.
I've got a similar collaborative theme across areas that we've identified, but specifically the transform and unlock locations that we have. So you did reference that in the next Pānuku section that's highlighted, and Panuku's put wording around their being council's lead urban regeneration agency. So my question is, how is that then reflected back in the Pānuku section? Forgive me if I raise it now, it sounds like it's more Pānuku, but it needs to be, in my opinion, reflected in Auckland Transport. How are we reflecting back in Auckland Transport this concept of, in the transform and unlock areas, Panuku's lead agency status? Does that, and in fact, should we look at a section across Pānuku and Auckland Transport, possibly Watercare, a section in all their documents around transform and unlock locations? Are we valuing them to the point that we need to make sure that all the dots are joined, all the T's are crossed? So I'll just leave it there, because then I have a couple of specific Pānuku comments, and I'll wait for that section there. But my question is, how is it reflected back in AT's documents?
I think at the moment the comment that we've made in paragraph 36, the second bullet point, could possibly be expanded to encompass that kind of sense of a greater strategic alignment across those organisations. I'd probably want to take some advice from some of my more senior colleagues at council about how that was worded, but I don't see that that's a problem in principle.
Yeah, and I think just building on, actually the point raised by Councillor Newman. There's probably some issues to explore here around when a part of the council family is leading the redevelopment of an area or the work in a spatial priority area, the governance around that, because we can't have one part of the council family doing something that cuts across what everybody else is trying to achieve. So look, we'll take some advice on that. We take the point and we'll work something into the comments probably across Auckland Transport, Panuku and Watercare, but we'll think about the others as well.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. I wonder if another target that shouldn't be included, and given the presentation from David this morning, and that would be improving congestion by keeping giving targets around commute times. If we're really looking at easing congestion and making travel around the city easier, shouldn't we actually be looking at tracking that and seeing what improvements are being made over time in commuter time to various points around the city? I know that it's pretty much done elsewhere, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that in Auckland, and that should be the job of Auckland Transport.
I've just called somebody far cleverer to the table who may be able to assist in this.
Josh.
Thank you. I mean, I think the big picture is the LTP is the opportunity to do a from scratch look at, are we measuring the right things, and we will connect that into the Auckland plan, and then that will flow through into SOIs going forward. In terms of the way congestion is currently captured in the SOI, I think I would agree with Mr. Hopkins earlier and agree that it's probably too complex at the moment. The measures around productivity, you kind of need a calculator to understand. And, you know, sure, you can track whether it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, but some clear measure around how much is congestion getting better or worse, and put in a meaningful way, because we can easily say 23% of the arterial road network suffers from level of service E or F, and it's kind of a bit meaningless, whereas I guess you could say average commutes have gone from 21 to 23 minutes over the past 2 years might be a more meaningful measure.
That's exactly what I was thinking
Totally
of.
support.
So I think we don't want to create perverse outcomes with the way that we set our targets, so we need to sort of work through it, but certainly creating something that's more meaningful to your average person on the street is a key necessary outcome going forward.
Mr. Mayor, I think the average person on the street is concerned about how long it takes them to get from point A to point B, and that's exactly the kind of measurement I'm referring to.
I think there's nobody around the table that would disagree with that. I've been measuring it just this year, and I reckon it's gone up by 7 minutes, but there you go. So I think part of that's already encompassed in the pretty clear message you're sending to AT on what they need to do with their statement of intent. Of course, we can set targets, but unless we haven't got funding to provide the infrastructure to enable their achievement, it could be a rather frustrating process.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not asking for a target. I'm just asking them to demonstrate whether the actions that they're taking is actually improving or not improving congestion and travel time in particular.
Yep.
Travel time is the most important thing because travel time is money to people.
Yep. They have got a section on specific routes, which is probably optimistic on page 84, but I take on board the point and we'll try and incorporate that. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make a quick comment too, that these recommendations in here for Auckland Transport, read very well to me, very supportive, and I think they address some of the points that were raised in the public forum as well. About perhaps looking more forward-looking rather than past achievements. So I was very pleased to read those. My comment was just for you and Ross to perhaps be able to consider just reading through Auckland Transport's statement of intent here that just about the rural sector, Phil. There doesn't seem to be any reference there. There was in the old statement of intent just a sentence that said that there'd be some money ring fence for seal extensions in the LTP. I just wonder if that similar wording should be taken through into this one. I just wonder if we could make that as a note for you to consider.
Seek some advice on that. That's whether reference is made in the statement of intent about sealing unsealed roads, basically, or whether that's a long-term plan issue. Can I get some feedback from you on Councillor Sayer's suggestion?
Yeah. I understand the funding is still ring-fenced in the LTP, so if it's still ring-fenced there, I don't see a problem of
And indeed, Councillor Sayers approached me with a comment about that, and I've raised it with Auckland Transport already and just awaiting their response on exactly how that's best incorporated into the next revision of the Statement of Intent.
Councillor Sayers will be very happy about that. Thank you.
So, Phil, just to clarify, so it will be something that you and Ross will consider? And with that extra feedback as well?
Take some advice on the response that you've got, Edward, from Auckland Transport, but as I heard it, there is it is still ring-fenced, but the question is whether that can be incorporated within the statement of intent.
That's right.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I mean, a lot of the things that have been said are good, and I do think we need to make it much clearer actually what AT are doing. I mean, when I look at that statement of intent, it doesn't mean anything to the general public or even me. It's just word, you know, there's no actual projects that make you think something's going to happen. My issue, added on to the other people's comments, especially around town centre development, are that we've missed out private developers in there and AT's relationship with them, because we know that increasingly when we're Panuku are working with people, they will not be they'll be working with council, but they'll also be working with private developers. And I think that, and subsequently AT will be involved in a lot of those developments, road connections, transport connections, all of those sorts of things. And I'd like to see much better relationships, not that, oh, it's a developer, let's, you know, muck them around, because I think sometimes that happens. We actually have to have a much more land use and integrated, transport integrated plan, and I don't think that AT can just be, oh, we'll come along, we want to do it our way of doing stuff, rather than how do we do this together to get the best outcome for the public? Because that's who we're doing this for. Who the hell else are we doing? We're not doing it for AT. We're developing our town centres for people, and they've got to work. And there can be great master plans, and then sometimes AT will come along, no, we want to do it this way. And there's no argument, it just happens. And sometimes there are perverse outcomes, and they do a lot of good stuff as well, but just in my experience in the Northwest at the moment, it's not working. So I think we have to make sure that AT are really having good relationships with everybody, not just our departments, and we need to get the best outcomes from the big investment that we put in. Thank you.
Any comment from officials there?
I think if the rest of the council agrees with that, we can probably find a way of getting AT to commit to improved relationships with the private sector.
And sorry, can I just add to that? Because the reality is we're not going to do these developments. We know we don't have enough money to do it all. So this is the reality. We have to rely on the private sector. So we've got to have good relationships with them. And I'm not saying giving them everything they want, but we need to be fair and we need to work in together and across the whole spectrum, as well as with council. I'm not asking for special favours.
And not special relationships like former members of the Rodney District Council enjoyed when working for AT. Okay, Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, thanks staff for this. When I look at the LOE, it was quite exhaustive for this particular CCO, and I'm still trying to reconcile the key points of the LOE with the feedback that our staff have given us here in the document, the report here today. And I wouldn't mind if we have another look post this meeting just to make sure we've tracked that LOE really well, because I'm seeing a few gaps. So that's point. Look, I totally agree with the feedback that's provided by the staff. Roads and Streets Framework, mass transit projects focusing in that area, absolutely critical. How well we're doing in enhancing the bus network, absolutely critical. I just want to go through a few points, Mr Mayor, and then I will forward this to your office as well, but I need to say them quickly, otherwise I'll be eating up too much time. Point one is we need to note, and this is recorded in resolution, for Auckland Transport to expedite the transfer of surplus land assets to Panuku Development Auckland for regeneration and possible disposal. I think you've covered the emphasis on collaboration on the Auckland City Centre Master Plan, and then I gather any sort of new targets or measures about reducing traffic would actually have to be, that would have to be subject to LTP? That would be an LTP, not an SOI issue? So at the moment, there's no intention to reduce traffic.
Significant, I don't think there's any targets relating to city centre traffic numbers, particularly in the SOI or the LTP. And I think if we were to make sort of strategic changes to key outcomes, then the LTP is probably the best
park
place
it
to
for
do that.
LTP. Good. When we go to strategic themes, Mr Mayor, which is at page 75, you've got the current existing strategic themes, and then you go to a paragraph at the bottom on the revised strategic themes. And this is quite important. I read the existing and then I read the revised, and I could not understand the relationship between the two. It's not clear to me at all when you go to that paragraph on page 75, revised strategic themes, what has changed? One key one has changed, and the one that has changed is a critical one. The one that's been taken out is ensure a sustainable funding model and ... So for me, I'm in the dark on what the revised strategic themes mean. Are they suggesting that they're signalling that for the LTP? Because I would say that if it's revised strategic theme, that is a shift in direction that we need to be picking up through LTP. Can we just explain what's going on there, because it's grey?
I think it's fair to say we found that confusing too. And I think paragraph 35 kind of says that, and basically that we need to use one set of strategic themes, not two, and that if the new ones are to inform the 2018 LTP, then we should use the current ones, because this SOI most applies to the 17-18 year. And if we are going to change the strategic themes, that should be in my opinion at least, a joint discussion of council and Auckland Transport.
So the one is revised, Mr Mayor, that's been taken out is ensure a sustainable funding model, which I just mentioned. I thought that was one of the biggest challenges of this council.
That is the biggest challenge, because without that you can't deal with any of the other strategic themes. So I think para 35 does signal that quite clearly, that we want this redone, and the themes need to be consistent with what we have in the long-term plan as well. I'm not sure why they have, if the board made this decision, why that wasn't a strategic theme. It's the overridingly important issue in this whole portfolio area.
Thank you. There are a few projects that are mentioned there which are reflective. This is forward-looking. Just get rid of the filler. It's nice to see some very successful projects done, but they're not relevant. Just on the work program, the 3-year work program, the way I read it, and I think you've covered it, but it's just very random. It's very hard to read it. You know, how does it respond to the big issues, the big capital spends, the big OPEX spends? And then there's a second tier, which I think also needs to, you know, those ones that actually speak to communities a bit more than our big RTN focuses, etc. I'll leave my paper to explain what I mean there, and won't go into that any further. We're into the 3rd year of the Accelerated Transport Program. I can't see anywhere here a clear reference as to where we're up to and what we've got to do in the final year of the Accelerated Transport Program, particularly, Mr Mayor, taking into account that it is that interim transport levy, final year of the ITL that we're utilising. We are behind. I can see we're behind in quite a few areas, It needs a clear articulation as to what the status of the accelerated transport program delivered through the ITL is. It's not there at the moment. For example, page 81, that's me vibrating.
It must be painful.
I'll stop vibrating. So, on page 81, there's mention there of maintain momentum on the delivering the cycle program. If we maintained the momentum, we would fall further behind because we are behind in the accelerated transport program part, which is cycling. We are well behind. So I would suggest that we need to accelerate momentum on delivering the cycle program. But that's just an example, one example, and I'm sure there will be more, of where we're not fully aware of where we're up to on the accelerated transport program. Rapid transit network, you've identified the themes I've covered. Also, in our letter of expectation, we asked them to outline the SOI quite specifically, detail around efficiency programs to drive down costs, create greater efficiency. Are you confident that that has been adequately reflected?
Not as the draft currently stands.
Right. Okay, so that's got to be picked up, Mr. Mayor. I'll table these, but I think I'll probably go back to my very first comment. I think we need to reconcile again the LOE with what we've got back, because I'm still seeing maybe even more gaps than we've picked up today. Thanks.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive and very helpful. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris has covered some of my points, but I think, and it's probably responding a little bit to the public forum, David, we had around congestion, but I think we need to, and Auckland Transport needs to talk more about moving people as opposed to congestion or vehicle counts or the numbers of cars. So when we're using a corridor better to move people, there may be one lane that is still congested, but we're actually moving more people. Oniwa Road in my ward is one, that the general lane is always congested, but we're moving 70% of the humans in the transit lane and 30% of the vehicles, and we're increasing that whole space a lot because we've just added more double deckers to that, and we're adding more next month. So that's increasing numbers of people moving, but we may still see visible congestion, but we're actually moving people a lot more. So that's not really said in the statement of intent or our letter around that, and that's the same as the Northern Busway. The numbers of cars reduced over the harbour bridge, but people still see congestion, but we actually increase the number of people crossing the bridge by thousands and thousands. So that needs to be thought of more. We mentioned walking and cycling infrastructure in here, but I think we need to, once again, it's around that people, how can we use a corridor better? You know, the city centre is one. If we focus on the number of people we're moving around in those spaces, we would actually automatically make the footpaths and things much wider and reduce the space when we have, one or two cars waiting at an intersection with, 200 people standing on the footpath. So if we put the focus on people being creative, it's mentioned there, but I think we do need to have Auckland Transport as focusing more on the urban development, kind of being creative in our town centres and seeing it more of a people space. It's in there a little bit, and around our plans, I think Auckland Transport's response was they're working with us on the Auckland plan refresh, but I think around Chris's point around the city centre master plan and the issues that have arisen from the Victoria Linear Park and things, if they need to be, Auckland Transport needs to be responding to all our plans, not just the Auckland plan refresh or the LTP, it's all our bodies of work. How can they respond correctly to what our vision is as a council, and then the transport has to come out of that. So it's not just about putting out something that they want to do that actually is completely opposite to not just what the Auckland plan says, but actually all our plans, the city centre master plan. The other thing is renewals. There's a mention of renewals and more clarity around that, but I think it might be too specific for something like a statement of intent maybe, but I think there's a lot of scope when assets are being renewed that they could be changed and upgraded based on the policies and directions we want. So wider footpaths are just done automatically, cycle lanes are done automatically, as opposed to us then asking for an extra capital project to go on top of that. So I don't know, that's probably more for the LTP maybe, but I think there's a way, because we already mentioned renewals in here, just to make it more updating, not just replacing like for like, when actually the numbers of people and things using that space are a lot different. So that is all.
Thank you very much. Any further comment on that? Some of those reinforce the comments that Councillor Darby has made.
Just on the final point, Councillor, at the bottom of in my version, page 5, and paragraph 36, we have mentioned about checking for opportunities to improve walking and cycling amenity when renewals are done. So that might go some way to answering that one.
I think just on your point around shifting people, that's what the productivity measure is intended to measure. It's just probably still a bit difficult to understand, and whether we can capture the same point of congestion impact rather than congestion severity. So if a lot of people are able to avoid congestion, then we want to understand that. So that's part of the story of how we develop, I guess, a better congestion measure that both captures your point around, hey, if someone's not in congestion or I'm shifting a lot more people down a bus lane, that's a good thing, but it's not in a very complex productivity measure.
And the other thing is around travel times, just how that's seen also, because that can be misleading, because when I catch the bus in, it takes half an hour, but the exact same distance if I drive can take an hour. So my travel time is great if I actually use public transport, but if I have to drive, it's double the time. So we might not be able to change the travel time in my car, but I actually can. So
And
that's
I
how
guess
we show that.
It's also the trade-off between travel time and reliability is what's more important, a 20-minute trip that could be 40 minutes 10% of the time, or a 25-minute trip that's guaranteed 25 minutes. So it varies per person. I guess my point is it's quite complicated, and that's why we probably want to take the time through developing the LTP to do the measures properly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hulse.
Just two quick things, Mr Mayor. The challenge we've got here, I think, is exactly as Councillor Darby put it. We are kind of trying to schmooze this over, and we are indeed sort of looking backwards a little bit. I think the next one is the really important one. When we've done the Auckland Plan refresh, we know where we're heading, and we've also got the LTP, where hopefully we can turn some of this on its head, because this is very business as usual. I'm very keen that our next one reflects the congestion-free network, and I completely agree with Councillor Hill saying we need to be measuring the movement of people, not the movement of vehicles. So to that end, I just think we need greater clarity around the issue that Councillor Quack's raised, which was travel times. It's very useful having this table in here, but we need to make it quite clear that travel times will not reduce. Car travel times are not going to reduce in any way, nor should people expect them to, because that's simply not possible. But travel times will be more reliable by utilising public transport and alternatives. Just something I'd like us to signal is in the movement to of land and surplus land going to Panuku, I'd like us to signal somewhere that we need to be reviewing alternative funding mechanisms, and I think it's a time to signal and challenge Auckland Transport and Panuku around the idea of value uplift. We're creating huge wealth and value in people's adjacent properties when we put this infrastructure in. We simply need to garner some of that to use for further infrastructure. And just finally, I think figures are important. We do fling around an awful lot of information based on nothing, and I just do need to respond that at the workshop that we had with AT, they made it quite clear that it was internationally verified and independently verified that they had returned through their large events $44 million to the Auckland economy, and I don't know how councillors missed that figure when it was given to us. So figures are important. I think we need to make sure that they're the right figures in all our CCO's plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chairman. One of the problems with running it this way is that often it's a supplementary to something that was a little while ago. So I've got a few supplementaries to a few of the comments. Firstly, to Councillor Cooper, I agree with her entirely on the issue of how we try and give some weighting, if it's possible, Alistair, on partnerships. So we know historically that we've been able to achieve that. Sylvia Park was not built by council, it was built by Kiwi Investments. We can have more of those. There's another one proposed for Drury, that's fantastic. But I want to come back to Councillor Quack's and bring it back perhaps to Josh's response to him on getting that alignment. We all agree on it, we've debated it, but how do we get the real accountability measures, and how do we make them stick? And that is needing, I think, a lot more work, and we have to accept the things and the changes in the policies that we're doing at council. I mean, are going to impact on that. So you end up with wriggle room and people sort of being able to back away, and that's the point that I think Councillor Hulse is making. With 122 new residents every single day, we are not going to see on those arterial, the productivity. We can't just see these issues in isolation. So I don't want you to respond now, but I would like you to be able to give me some greater confidence. To me, the best measure of whether Auckland Transport is making progress is just going to Dominion Road. Dominion Road we haven't made a lot of progress on for a hell of a long time. But I can see, if we're going to come to the sorts of things that David expressed this morning and Councillor Quack's, last night there was a public meeting and your apologies were expressed at it, Your Worship, but there's a new hotel development, 160-bed hotel on Dominion Road, and the development application has not one single car park, even though they're going to have events, they've got a cafe. Now, that is decisions are yet to be made on that, but all I'm trying to say here is we have to have meaningful assessments that can be measured. And that's the work, Josh, I'd like you to comment on. How are we going to hold that Board of Auckland Transport to account when on a daily basis the rules of the game are going to keep changing? So I'm putting that in a really clumsy way. I wanted to do it immediately after Councillor Quack's, but can you just give me a little bit of further insight on how we can get that alignment, how we can ensure that the letters of expectations are going to be meaningful and the congestion measures are going to reflect what is actually happening?
I mean, I think part of this is the SOI part, but the bulk of it's probably an LTP question. I mean, just to touch, I guess, on how does what you measure and how you set targets affect strategic prioritisation, which I think is sort of where you're going to. Where you set a very challenging target, or where you set quite a soft target, or you say, we don't mind if it gets a bit worse on this thing, that's actually a really, really powerful tool for how you want a CCO to prioritise its work. So for years, we have set very, very aggressive public transport ridership targets for Auckland Transport. And almost every single SOI, we have said, no, we would like you to bump it up. You want to push it down, we want to bump it up. And we've done that because that was a very strong strategic approach that we've had ever since Auckland Council came into existence, that we really want to focus on that area. And I think that's been really, really successful. We've increased ridership by, we're nearly reaching 90 million. We're probably at 60 million or something like that when Auckland Transport was formed. So through having very strategic approach to what we measure and what we set aggressive or less aggressive targets on, we can significantly influence where we want the CCO to really focus their efforts. And I think moving forward, it's how we make those key decisions about which are the things to set really strong stretch targets for, where we want the CCO to turn itself inside out and trying to achieve this thing. And even if they fail slightly, we'll actually give them a pat on the back and say, hey, we almost don't want you to easily achieve this target. We want you to try everything you can, but this is a really tough stretch target, versus ones we say, we want to keep an eye on this, make sure it stays the same or doesn't go backwards too fast. I think that's kind of but that's more an LTP discussion rather than this year SOI, because I guess we're still measuring the same things as per the last LTP.
Josh, you were in the room before when we had with council investments, that some of those assumptions that we're making, so that the Mayor and the Chair of the Finance Committee can come back to us to frame the LTP questions, are relevant to a whole range of CCOs. So is there guidance that you can give us? I mean, I agree with you on stretch targets. I think it's better to aim for the moon and you know, you might get halfway than to be defeatist in your approach. But we need to bring that along with the points around financial sustainability and ensuring that we can get alternative, you know, it's bringing all of that into a package that actually gives the public accountability. This is not just Auckland Transport, this is just not Auckland Council. It is the public being able to see how we've come together and how we're framing it, that we can move forward. So those measurements are maybe ones that we can't see just in isolation to the individual CCOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, the most significant recommended change to the draft SOI is to tell the story in a much simpler and more easily understood way by the general public. I think that's the strongest flavour that...
Well, it's been the biggest weakness of Auckland Transport.
And I think that's, you know, the targets and measures are part of that story. It's also about, hey, look, out of the 700 million CapEx program, X percentage is going into these kinds of projects, these kinds of projects, these kinds of projects. You can clearly see where we are focusing our efforts, and it's, you know, to deliver these kinds of things.
I think that's a point well made and picked up in those comments. Look, I'm keen to get through. We've got two more speakers to go on this, Mike Lee and then Leslie Simpson. We'll try and make progress and maybe get through the agenda before lunch.
Keep lunch in mind, Mr. Mayor. In terms of this statement of intent, in many respects, it's probably the most urgent and relevant for us right now. You wouldn't find it in here, but essentially, despite an enormous investment and expenditure and capital and operational funding over the last 6 years or so, Auckland is still not performing at the level of comparator cities in New Zealand or Australia. So I think we need to keep that in mind, because if you read this, it all looks pretty good. And in the Chair's forward, it's very clear that if there's a failure or fall off in performance, it's due to not enough money. And I think we need to be a little bit sceptical about that. I have some questions. Given this document, for what it's worth, is to inform not just us, but everyone, I just am concerned about the legibility and the integrity, I guess, of the figures in here. I haven't obviously looked at all of them, but in terms of rail, for instance, rail income is stated to be 56 million in AT's financial report for the year 16-17. It was somewhat lower than that. The other aspect is the fare box return, which is something imposed on regional councils by the government to try and give it some confidence it's getting value for money, I guess. It's somewhat arbitrary, 50%, but then again, it's a stretch target and therefore useful. In the 2015-16, I see Auckland Transport are reporting a 51.2% actual. I would question that, and I believe that figure would have been reached by using commercial services that are not recipients of NZTA funding or government funding or ours, to use those numbers, the Devonport Ferry, Waiheke Ferry, the non-subsidised services, the airport shuttle, to change the ratio to make that figure look better, which, okay, that may make some people feel better, but it's not really giving good information. The NZTA fare box recovery ratio was to ensure that the subsidised services were achieving that. And so it's one thing to fool other people, another thing to fool oneself. So I think we need a little bit more checking around that.
We can check to ensure it's consistent with NZTA's definitions.
Yeah, and the last time I checked it was not. And but it seems to be a temptation to make that look good. I would like to know where in here is the intention to extend rail services to the Kumeu-Huapai area, which is under intense development right now and does have a railway line and does have a legacy plan to extend rail services there. I can't find that. I can't find anything in here about fare evasion, and anyone who knows anything about rail in Auckland knows that fare evasion is still chronic, and I think that needs to be addressed. The other metric which is studiously avoided, and I referred to it earlier, is per capita use. That is a metric in which Auckland can compare its performance and the money it is putting in to other cities. Wellington does it, the other comparative cities across the Tasman do it, and it's a very useful benchmark. It's one that Auckland Transport doesn't like to use, but as a shareholder we should make them use it, and then we can all have a reality check on what we're getting for all the money we are pouring in. And relatively speaking, I believe we are putting in significant funding and have been. In terms of the stretch targets, I noted Mr. Arbery's comments. Yes, I recall there was something of a crisis between the council and Auckland Transport a few years ago when I think it was the Transport Committee, or was it the Infrastructure Committee, upheld quite aggressive targets, and Auckland Transport balked at it. The Mayor of the day supported our stand, and yes, rather than breaking the organisation, as the chair of AT warned us, the targets were achieved relatively easily. And I think in terms of targets, I think we need to bear in mind the targets we had from the Auckland Plan, which I think is 120 million by 2022. Mr. Arbery will recall that. That is a useful stretch target to keep in front of Auckland Transport. One more point, that is other financial information, current value of assets, and it's got here 17,500 million. Is that seems a little bit under when you take into account the value of the rolling stock, the stations, ferry wharves, fibre optics, all those capital assets. So what is that 17,500 million? Is that it's on page 89 of the agenda. The figures need to be need to stand up to scrutiny and to comparisons with figures used in other documents if they are to engender confidence. I'll leave it at that.
Any comments on any of those points that officials would like to make?
I mean, I think we can double check the numbers. I mean, part of the simplification story is obviously the tables where legislatively required need to be there, but there also needs to be a financial or an investment story that council's making in Auckland Transport that needs to be more easily understood, and we need to ensure that the numbers are right. I think that's probably the key.
The fare evasion?
We can, I mean, I know Auckland Transport has a number of activities to try and combat that. It's gating a number of additional stations in the coming year. That could be captured as part of the work program, I suppose. And that's quite a significant investment to gate a station. So we'll have a chat with them and just see how we bring that in.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Until Councillor Fletcher just brought that up, that wasn't actually on my list, but I will say that I have spoken to a train person, what do you call them?
Train manager?
Manager, that said that fare evasion is huge, and if you gate one, they just keep going a little bit further and get on the next one. Yeah, so I think that's a very, very, very valid point. Look, I'm going to keep it quite, I want to eat like everybody else. So I just think, I listened to the public forum person, and I just want to highlight again, Auckland Transport just has to have a commitment to address congestion and help Aucklanders move through its region more efficiently than they currently do. It's that simple for me. And I think at the end of the day, Auckland Transport is probably the bane of most Aucklanders' lives. It affects them, whether they are able to park where they want to park, if a car mode is their way of going, if they want to catch a bus or, can't move because the transport solution isn't there. I think the communication, I understand our discussions, and Chris, Councillor Darby, I'm really keen. I don't know that all your points, they're actually up on the screen, so I'm very keen for what you've put together to be included, definitely, and Councillor Hills as well. I just think that of all our CCOs, this one, from a communications perspective to Aucklanders, needs to be the one that we get right. That's just my comment. I support what everyone's saying, and I think we're going to try and tighten this up considerably. But when we go back to Auckland and say, look, we are committing significant money of yours into Auckland Transport so that we can move through the region more efficiently, and this is how we have said we want Auckland Transport to address that. So I think that's a really powerful, our comms around this is incredibly important.
Thank you very much. That item had more speakers than any other, which backs up the...
I have a question on behalf of Councillor Casey, because she is not here.
Okay.
And that is on the issue of crossings, rail crossings.
Level crossings.
Level crossings. Whether you feel that we have actually captured that. It's obviously for signing off with the Mayor, but it needs to be recorded as an issue.
We'll have a think about that. I mean, the best way of addressing that. So there is a major program that was included in ATAP of level crossing removals. And I guess it's just at what point is the money available to start picking those off?
And can you take it back to Councillor Cooper's question around partnerships? I'm sure there's a better way of doing it than we're doing it at the moment.
Okay, let's look at Panuku. Some initial comments.
Can I have answers in due course for those questions I raised, Mr Mayor?
Yep, thank you. If we can make sure that the councillor gets a response on the issues, I've got a note, but I'm sure you have as well.
Sure. The comments on Panuku begin with just a request for them to clarify exactly in their statement of intent what their role is, because they drift a little bit in some of the wording into describing themselves as an urban development agency, which is a slightly separate concept from their role as a regeneration agency at the moment. A second comment is to ensure that they're aligning with central government capital planning wherever possible, especially in the transform and unlock areas. There's a corresponding statement to the one that's in Auckland Transport's draft statement of intent about working together with Auckland Transport, and we've already covered that a little bit, so we can look at strengthening that if need be. And finally, the comment around more explanation of some of their targets as well, just to be clear of what's going on.
Thank you. Any questions? Denise Lee.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's just really carrying on my earlier point from the Auckland Transport section about paragraph 44, and whether we need to, not just in Auckland Transport and Panuku, but Watercare as well, possibly other CCOs, just an undergirding of that transform and unlock areas, if we're going to back ourselves for that, and agree with how you're wanting to sort of not play with, but amend some of the wording around Panuku's lead agency status. But it should be an expectation from us across other CCOs that is acknowledged and has a bit of teeth to it, and not just Panuku's statement of intent. Look, I'll just leave it there, but otherwise agree with your comments in terms of waiting, deleting the comments in regards to the government's Urban Development Authority legislation. I think you've got there, you want to delete part of it, but just retention of providing that it just could provide additional powers to Panuku. So there's still reference to the government's legislation rather than, so you're not suggesting to delete all of it. Can you just clarify that, that bit? You've got it in paragraph 41 of our report.
Yes, I agree with how you're suggesting we characterise it. There should still be reference to the UDA process that's going on, but just not state a particular organisational position on that process, and because that's subject to a council decision that hasn't been made yet.
Yeah, coming to planning committee. Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clow.
I would have thought 43 they're doing that. We're asking them to investigate. I mean, I know with working with Panuku, with Avondale and that they are working with Housing New Zealand, they are working with the Hobsonville Land Company, and to be quite honest, I'd be a bit damn horrified if we found they weren't doing that in a significant way in all the major areas. So my question there is, do we really need to ask them to investigate that? Maybe they just need to inform us of what they're doing rather than investigating, because if they're not doing that, that's horrifying.
I think that's probably a fair comment, Councillor. We could probably change the wording to something along the lines of make a commitment to continue to ensure that they're aligning the capital planning with their work.
Now, I know they are coming back to us with some papers, a paper on recommendations to optimise the land in the in the unlock category as well as the transform, and they're going to come back and really suggest that they need to have the authority, like they do at Onehunga and Manukau, to keep all the land sales within that area to go about the developments which could be purchasing and developing within that area. So we really need them to come back to help to inform the LTP about the disposal targets, because if you remember, that was really the only goal that Auckland Council property effectively had in reality, was to actually sell land and contribute up to, we wanted 600 million over 10 years, which was really just a gap in our LTP that we just identified. We said, right, go out and raise it, because we're short of that. Now, there's not a lot of science involved in how it was done, and they're clearly falling a little bit behind on the target. I think they're at about 250 now, which is pretty good, but it's getting harder and harder. So we need them to come back and give us a very accurate synopsis going forward for the LTP, because there's a big gap there in our LTP, and it could end up a couple of $100 million short, which is, again, another couple of $100 million on basically deficit, infrastructure deficit that we've got. And I think aligned to that, they need to be telling us how are things going with Auckland Transport regards disposals as well, because Auckland Transport, in fairness, are getting harder and harder again to agreeing to dispose land for us, because they want to hold everything, and of course they do need to hold quite a bit. But I think we need to be getting them to come back with some pretty serious analysis of going forward.
Any comment on that? Some of that will obviously come up under LTP, particularly the meeting of the target, but...
I mean, just to clarify, is it something similar to what we're doing with Auckland Council Investments Limited, just seeking them to provide us advice in the future, later this year?
Yeah, but the disposal side of things, I mean, it's very, if you look on page 96, I mean, it's one word at the end of point number 4 of the 4 broad areas that they're supposed to focus on, but it's something that really all councillors need to be better informed of and to think more seriously about the consequences of voting against land disposal, or on the other side buying extra land for parks or etc. when we don't need to do that. It's a real big thing that a lot of people seem to think, okay, 2 million here, extra spend, so what? We've got 600 million in the budget or something like that. So these are big funding gaps that we're potentially going to have to somehow breach, bring together, and I don't know how we can do that. It's a worry.
Yeah, I think in the Auckland Transport comments, we've asked for a commitment from Auckland Transport to a joint review of their property portfolio with Panuku to identify surplus assets for sale. I guess a more general comment would be that it's also a challenge for the entire council group, not just Transport and Panuku, to identify assets that aren't core to our business.
But then we sell land like we did on Dominion Road that have been acquired for light rail, and now when we go to buy it back, it's going to be 20 times the amount. So, I mean, you've got to go through it really carefully.
I think having some of the principles behind the disposal of land and the ability to meet targets would be useful in terms of the statement of intent, if we can fit that in.
Yeah,
because we need to know the criteria. Obviously, we don't want to dispose of land that may be important for corridors or may be important for public open space. And equally, we don't want to hold on to land that isn't relevant to either of those purposes, but could be realised. But maybe something in the statement of intent about the criteria they're following and their ability to meet the target, I think was Councillor Close.
Yes, and that will be an LTP discussion, because aside from the existing target that there currently is, there will be issues as Panuku comes to you with business cases for transformer unlock areas where, like you say, Councillor Clow, they want to reinvest those sale proceeds from that area back into that development project, which will have an impact on their overall ability to meet the other sales targets. So that should be a very serious topic of discussion in the LTP.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I recognise that this is probably a comment more for the LTP, and it's been confirmed by the officials, and I just wanted to support the comments by Councillor Clow around the sale of property or sale of assets. And I think through the LTP, we need to recognise that there needs to be an incentive for the local boards to actually get on board with the disposal of property, because in many cases the local boards are the ones who don't get anything out of any sales.
That's right.
And are then holding up the process because they don't want to sell. So I think in the LTP, through the LTP process, what we need to do is to find some kind of incentive which will help grease that wheel, getting the local boards to make some positive decisions around selling. There's nothing in it for them at the moment.
Exactly.
That's the problem. And that's why we need some incentives.
Thank you. Take that point on board. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, it kind of follows on with the topic that Councillor Quacks has just raised. I mean, and it goes back to, I think I'm just reiterating the point that I mentioned before around the disposal of land process when we've got spatial priority area work streams underway. There are some important land holdings in some of these SPA locations, and but notwithstanding the fact that we are currently undertaking community engagement, having developed principles and work streams for the spatial priority areas, we also have the disposal work stream going on, and so I don't quite know how you can reconcile all of that Your Worship, given that Councillor Clow has pointed out there's a need to achieve targets that are assisted by the disposal of land and freeing up capital, but at the same time, if we are true to achieving some of these development outcomes through the spatial priority area process, then some of these disposals are not necessarily helpful to achieving the aspirations that I assume the council has mandated when we identified the spatial priority areas previously. So maybe the staff could give clarity around that, because I'm utterly confused as to what our core objective is. Is it to realise capital through disposal of land, or is it to achieve good outcomes in these areas that have been identified as a priority for us? And Panuku's role in achieving those things.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points on this one. Page 101 of the agenda, up the top there, point 1 in the urban development category, there's a reference to framework plans. This concerns me when there is a use of the period 20 to 25 year period. It seems really odd. It's a bit like government's decision to give us light rail in 2047, which is pretty much, there's no plan to do so. So 2025 for me is too far out. I thought a framework plan should be really 0 to 10 years. We don't have the explanation right here now, but that is a totally inappropriate forecast for implementation. So I think we need to get some explanation from them, why they've got that number 2025, why isn't it 0 to 10? Because I think that's focusing on, say, Manukau, Onehunga, Northcote and the other unlocks, and I think there's community expectation that we do it way shorter than up to 25 years. The other point is there was some contention that the UDA reference should be taken out. I take a different view. I actually think they've signalled it here for discussion through our policy decisions and possibly LTP, will be LTP. I prefer to take another route on this, Mr Mayor, and retain it, but caveat it with, being subject to the CCO seeking policy endorsement of the council.
Yeah, I guess it's a question of cart before the horse. That may well be the direction we go in, but we can't put it in a statement of intent till we've made the decision ourselves. That's the difficulty. But comments from officials on both of those points, the framework plan and the appropriate time frame for that.
Just on the framework plan, I think my discussions with Panuku, that's based largely around the work that they've been doing down on the waterfront in Wynyard, and that they see that as a 20 to 25 year project, and they're sort of extrapolating that to other areas that they've become involved in. Whether that's appropriate, I think you're right, we need to have a discussion with them and for them to justify that time frame. Sorry, I've forgotten the second question.
The UDA and the reference we can make to that, given that Council hasn't actually yet formulated its submission to central government on that, but is in the process, officials are in the process of doing a draft, as I understand it.
Yes, and I guess that's the basis for our proposed comment there, was that until Council has actually formalised what its position is on it, and until the government actually passes whatever legislation is required, that it's a bit cart before the horse to be saying that they will be that. Look, I'm relatively relaxed either which way, because they can't go claiming to be a UDA until the government makes decisions we tell them to be, but we're happy to take guidance from you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Let's move on. The next one is Regional Facilities Auckland.
Through the Chair, just briefly, that point of the 2020, why don't we just say the next 25-year period, because they are taking the long-term view when it comes to Wynyard Quarter, Manukau and Onehunga, but Northcote, Avondale and a few others, they're aiming to do it in the next 5 years. 3 to 5 years or whatever.
You're talking about the framework plan
Yeah,
here?
the
Let's seek
next
clarification
3 to 5,
about that. It's an interesting point that Councillor Darby's made. Let's see why they've chosen those particular timeframes, because they may not be appropriate over the wider range of activities. But until we know what's in their mind, we might have difficulty in reformulating it. Okay, we're looking at Regional Facilities Auckland. Edward.
The key focus of our comments about Regional Facilities Auckland's draft statement of intent are essentially presentational issues to provide greater clarity for the public about what RFA is planning to do over the next 3 years. Namely, what we want is a clearer link between the strategic objectives section and the projects that they are proposing to deliver those objectives. A greater level of detail about the cost of services to different parts of their business, and just in general terms, so that the public can see what gets spent on the art gallery or the zoo and so on. And additional explanation of some of the targets that they've set, because some of them do look like they're going down, but there are reasons that underlie that, is my understanding. And the final point is just to get a greater commitment from RFA about collaborating across the council group to explore opportunities for good outcomes. Thank you.
Right, RFA. Any questions from councillors on that? Won't hesitate too long unless somebody has a pressing issue. Councillor Simpson.
So just on RFA, and it's across the council family, so a real clarity around, something like events, because RFA do events, Auckland Council do events, ATEED do events, and potentially how they can work together more to have some efficiencies around that space.
Some do events all on their own, like Eden Park Trust Board, so it's
Then
maybe
not
a more
CCO.
contentious issue.
But it just, working together, I think, across the family, potentially for efficiency.
It may be useful to have something in the document that asks them to clarify their relationships with other CCOs.
Yes, and there is a comment in the second bullet point of paragraph 49
I see that.
that refers both to Panuku and to ATEED in the event space.
And we'll take some other steps before we intrude Eden Park Trust Board into that. Okay, no other questions? Councillor Darby, Councillor Cooper.
With your goodwill, can I just back the bus up? Just one, I forgot to mention one of my notes on Panuku. It's very brief.
Yep, sure.
And it relates to paragraph 44. Paragraph 44, I think, is too limiting. Mr. Mayor, one of the problems I think we have at the moment is AT goes out, does its job well in designating and then using Public Works Act for infrastructure, say the City Rail Link, but it doesn't do it mindful of what the regeneration opportunity is. And then Panuku gets transferred the land for that, to create that opportunity. Now, the ideal way is for AT to work with Panuku at the outset when it acquires land to ensure that you acquire the appropriate land that would deliver good regeneration opportunity. So I think I would prefer that to be not as limited as it is there, just focusing on transform and unlock areas. I think there's greater opportunity for Panuku going forward to work with Auckland Transport in the acquisition of land necessary for transport infrastructure to ensure regeneration opportunity is safeguarded, something like that.
I think that's actually true when you think about some of the issues we've been dealing with, such as around Panmure and potentially around the new Mount Eden station. Is there any objection to putting that in? I think that would be a positive inclusion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
I'm going back to RFA. I mean, I think for me, it's clear RFA don't really do events. They look after the places where events happen. And I think that's where the confusion comes, but which often ATEED might promote. So that is the confusion, but I'm not confused. My concern is around actually they hold buildings on our behalf, and they have to come basically beg us for money to keep those buildings of a good standard. So I want to see something around our relationship with them, or them at least really clear about what their role is around maintaining our buildings. Because properties do some stuff, but they look after these buildings, and we're not actually giving them enough money to look after our own assets. So I want to see some sort of statement somewhere around what they're going to do, but also we need to be able to respond to that to say, well, how are we going to help them do that? Because they already earn an awful lot of money for the council, and we're going to be putting another burden on them in terms of wages, and that may cut into their ability to look after our buildings. So I want to be able to have it clearly spelled out, or somehow, I don't know who it's coming from, because the reality is we're imposing some stuff on them that makes it more difficult to do their job. How do we get them to show how they're going to maintain our assets, but at the same time have some sort of, we have some sort of obligation to them to not make that more difficult. I don't know how you put that in there, but I think that's going to be a big issue for us. We're giving money to other organisations to build buildings, you know, $10 million here, $15 million there, $3 million there, but we're strangling our own organisation's ability to look after our own assets.
And they're getting older.
And so I don't know how we can't ask them to do stuff if we hobble them. So, yeah, you might be able to help me on that one.
Well, I think for all the reasons you've just said, that's a discussion for the annual plan and LTP process, because it essentially comes down to what standard do you as a council want those buildings maintained to, and how much money are you prepared to invest in?
Yeah,
But that's true of all the CCOs, Auckland Transport. You can't put in a letter of expectation if you don't give them the funding to deliver it.
Exactly.
Everyone has assets.
Yep, okay, just wanted that out
It's
there,
a-
because
it's
I
a
do
good
think it's
point.
quite a difficult thing when we're giving, you know, we can't be giving money away to other organisations to do the very same thing that we won't do for our own assets, but I don't know how.
There are some other issues that come out of that, forward planning, for example, of spending intentions at Western Springs if they develop it as a world standard cricket ground consistent with international requirements. But those decisions haven't yet reached conclusion, so it's a little hard for them to explain, even though it may happen in the immediate future, what their spending intentions and what the demand on additional funding might be. Obviously, there are limitations on how much council could fund, but it may be that it's a little premature to put some of those issues into this report at this
Well,
point.
Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about current maintenance. I'm not even talking about new developments.
Yeah.
So,
But
I mean,
both are
that's
issues.
still in discussion, but I think that they definitely have a mandate to maintain the buildings that they manage on our behalf. Not even talking about the new stuff, but I think, yeah, as Alistair says, that's a conversation for the LTP, but I know that that board is very exercised with that. We just have to look out the window of where we are now at 1 through 5 and see the ATS Centre and what a terrible state it is in, and we've not, this council has not really put aside money, and that's supposed to be a really important building in this city on a very significant public square, and we've not given them enough money to do anything with it. We've given it to somebody else, the other end of town.
I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think they have built in a budget for upgrading the ATS Centre.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
And it's got leaky building issues.
It's pretty significant, actually.
It's quite a lot of money, but
Well, hopefully we give it to them.
this, is this an issue that needs to be better addressed within the statement of intent?
Yeah, look,
Both issues
Is it an
actually,
LTP?
new facilities
is it
and
purely an LTP
maintaining
issue?
existing,
Yeah.
or is it LTP?
I think
Dominantly.
I'd suggest this as a discussion in the LTP,
Okay,
because
thank
even
you.
do they have enough funding to maintain their assets as they currently stand is a funding discussion.
Okay.
Thank
I think
you.
I think we'll leave it to that. Okay, let's move on to the last of the big CCOs, water care. Edward.
The comments about water care focus on the importance of...
Last one.
Sorry, just I might have overlooked Councillor Clow. You wanted to comment on RFA?
It's just, you've got RFA and we've, stadium strategies, but continually the elephant in the room is Eden Park. That's, excuse me, the elephant in the room is Eden Park. It just seems to be always out there, being squished out of our fingers, and it's not really brought into any formal proposals. And I know it's a separate entity, but we've got a stake in that as well, and that is the issue going forward. I mean, and it is at the heart of the whole, RFA strategy, really, even though it's not part of the family.
Yeah.
But then we are guaranteeing $50 million.
It is an issue. We have got a guarantee of 40 million, which may be problematic, and we have a loan of 6 million, and we have Eden Park not able to meet its depreciation requirements, which is probably 8 or 9 million a year. They are currently outside the RFA, so we can't deal with this under the RFA, but we may be looking at, in fact, almost certainly be looking at that as part of the long-term plan because of the requirements imposed on us. Currently, we don't appoint the directors of Eden Park either, so they are not they're not controlled by us, but they may well become a cost to us. Anyway, I think if we can move on to water care now.
Yes, thank you. The comments around water care fall into two areas. One is really around reiterating the need for water care to align with and collaborate with council in a greater way. The first example of that is really around the importance of water care committing to aligning its growth strategy with councils through things like the FULS, the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy. Providing more clarity of priority projects and their relative importance and how those priorities again link with the council's growth strategy. And the third point is around supporting a Three Waters review or strategy as that process develops. The second set of comments are really around things like the public presentation, if you like, around things like demand management and what we're doing around climate change resilience, and just providing more information so that the public can see what's going on, especially in the context of recent weather events.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we focus on resilience. Water Care are currently doing a review of the events of Cyclone Debbie. If that's the right one. So many cyclones, I can't remember which.
She was ready.
The first of the weather bombs, and so they'll be reporting through that. But it could well be strengthened, I think, within the statement of intent, particularly with the likelihood, as we've just witnessed, of a greater occurrence of extreme weather events. But are there other comments, Councillor Holtz?
Thank you. I think the comments in the report are excellent. I just want to make a very small point, thinking about recent water infrastructure in Aotearoa. We've just got a gap that we need to fill somewhere, and I know it's referred to in the governance manual about the relationship between the governing body and water care, but I'd like to see us pick that up in here under engaging with our communities. In the first instance, water care must engage with the governing body on these critical issues that will be of concern or importance to local communities. I don't want to wordsmith the issues, but there's just a fundamental gap between water care and their understanding of their relationship with us. They might not be funded by rates, but it doesn't mean that they're an independent company and a law unto themselves. I want to acknowledge our new chair of Water Care, who I think understands this very, very well and is doing a sterling job, but I think we need to embed culture change every step of the way. So when you've got a big, difficult thing to do, go and talk to us first. I'm sure there'll be the right words, Mr. Mayor, that are a little bit more formal than that.
Okay, I think we all know what you're talking about, councillor.
They had a few emails to prove it.
And we, that is, I think there have been some lessons learned, but maybe we can build that more into our statement of intent. Councillor Quacks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to get a bit of a clarification on what is meant by better narrative around demand management.
What I'm seeking there is just greater explanation of the things that Watercare already are doing to manage demand better, and the things that they are exploring to continue to improve the efficiency with which Auckland has used water.
Okay, would that include pricing? Clearly, that's going to be the biggest driver of demand.
I think that was up to
Of the
Watercare to
driver
include
demand,
whatever actions they're taking, but I assume that includes elements to do with ensuring pricing is appropriate.
Can we be a bit more clear on that?
I'm sorry, councillor, what's
Be a bit more clear on that, do you think?
yes, we could give Watercare more explanation what we mean by that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's a fair question. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Probably 3 points here. Thanks for mentioning the Three Waters strategy review. I'm just wondering, though, whether it's clear in your words that we are expecting a review of the 2008 Three Waters strategy document, because we lead in with a commitment to actively support council's value for money, etc., and then it doesn't get to the nub of it, which is we expect Auckland Watercare to undertake a review of the Three Waters strategy of 08. And I'm just not sure whether it's clear. And thank you also over the page, something Councillor Hulse and myself have been beating the drum on water demand management since 1886. And I'm encouraged to see that there, but what I don't see in their words is it almost looks like just a soft update as opposed to a review. The data inputs that the earlier water demand management plan are based on 2004 data inputs, and that's light years gone. So I think we need to convey that we're actually expecting a much more innovative water demand management plan, full stop. And it probably should reflect the need for an emergency incident water demand management plan as part of it, because the recent siltation events demonstrated to me that there is no emergency water demand management plan. So they're probably my 2 points there. They are covered, but I'm probably just asking them to be fleshed up a bit.
Okay, that's reasonably clear, I think.
Yes.
We've got two more. I'll take
my hand up as
well. Oh, three more. Well, in which case, I'll just need an indication from councillors. We have, after Watercare, we've got three small CCOs. It won't take much time, but we also have one other significant item on the agenda. Is it the mood of councillors you want to break for lunch at the end of Watercare and come back in half an hour, or would you rather complete the agenda?
Complete the agenda.
Complete the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll need a resolution that we continue. I'll move in that way. All those, seconder, please.
Yes.
Yep. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Councillor Simpson.
Sorry, Your Worship, thank you. I just want some clarification around point 58, which is, you've got in respect of measures, explanation should be given as to why targets, e.g. sewerage overflow and response time complaints, wet weather overflows, are significantly above achieved actuals. And the reason I say that is when I look at the attachment with that particular point, they've got a whole lot of targets about how their attendance at sewerage overflows and their attendance to look at blockages. But where's the investment into not having those in the first place or repairing those aged assets? So there's a whole lot of stuff here around responding quicker and faster to that. But, you know, we've had all this media about, you know, 400 Olympic swimming pools worth of raw sewage going in the harbour. I think we need to have a little bit more time, not just at responding, but actually doing something about it.
Well, that's project.
I suppose that links a little bit with Councillor Darby's comments about things like emergency water demand management, and we could ask Watercare to provide a better explanation of how the priority projects that they're planning to do in their work plan table contribute to long-term resilience of the network and things like that, and make that a lot clearer for the public reading the document.
Again, this is in the lowest common denominator, you know, back to what does Auckland see? Auckland's seen a whole lot of, you know, 3 very bad weather events and a whole lot of trouble that's gone with that. What are we doing to prevent it happening again? Pretty obvious.
Okay.
It's not clear.
That taken on board. Councillor Clow?
Yeah, under financial responsibility, one of their goals is to be a minimum cost service provider. I mean, there is possibly an argument that they're not raising enough revenue, therefore their plans aren't as ambitious as they should be. And, you know, we've found some issues come through just this recent flooding and rain bombs, or whatever you call them. And of course we're having a review, and we're most concerned about 3 waters and stormwater and that, yet there's never really any great proposal to raise more money. They can still operate at no profit, of course, but to raise more money in order to invest more, to try and fix these things faster. Are we just basically sending them a message all the time as keep the prices down? And, you know, yeah, just put the necessary infrastructure investment further and further out on the never-never.
Again, I apologise if I sound like a broken record, but this is probably an LTP discussion, because the price that they charge for water is to cover their costs associated with their investment program, and their investment program is driven off, well, what are the expectations around first meeting the growth challenge, but then also ensuring that the existing network is maintained so that we don't have overflows and other issues.
I did know that answer, I was just bringing it up again.
Yeah, very good.
I guess the other obvious point is that stormwater comes into that if we're talking about wastewater overflows, so some of it is outside Watercare on its own, but come within the Canopy project, which is referred to and which we will develop more fully, or see develop more fully. Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you, but just also picking up on the point that was raised before by Ross. I mean, the other issue is that, of course, Section 57 of the Local Government Auckland Council Act requires minimum pricing. So there's this thing called the Regulation of Parliament that impacts on price. Could I just raise the issue of the interface between Watercare as a bulk transmission service provider and Veolia as the local retailer under franchise in Papakura and part of Franklin, because I really struggle. I mean, I know that Veolia is very small in the context of the water organisation operation, but I really want to see a little bit of coverage of that relationship, because I really want to ensure that Veolia too is accountable, and I'm not quite sure how we achieve that, whether the statement of intent can address some of that, Your Worship, or not, but that franchise agreement's going to be in place for decades. I'm certainly having some issues in relation to chokes and backfill and overflows in Papakura, and it's quite hard to achieve outcomes with Veolia given that it doesn't seem to have any exposure to our accountabilities. So is that something that officers could maybe address with Watercare as to how that could be covered, because they do have a contractual relationship under that franchise, and it is going to continue, and it addresses the local network in Papakura and parts of Franklin, and that will address not only the current network but also the growth of that local network as we go through public structure planning moving forward.
We'll have a chat with Watercare about that, because I don't know that contract with Veolia well enough to know what we can or can't do at this stage, but we'll look into that.
Okay, and the focus is on accountability.
Accountability under that franchise, because it's a big issue in Papakura, and it will emerge as an ongoing challenge in Franklin too, as some of that future urban development applies in the Franklin ward, which sits under their franchise area.
We'll get you to follow that through and see if we can get some further information on that point. Councillor Stewart.
Yes, I'm really pleased that there's more information going to be about climate change and resilience. And I think Watercare is one of the CCOs that probably has a lot of pressure being put on them right now, especially with the unitary plan, and that they were not part of the planning of the unitary plan. And I guess if we'd had these flooding events prior to the unitary plan would look much different to what it is today.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, I know in Howick, during the Manukau City time, I know we did actually have a moratorium in a lot of parts of Howick, and as the Howick councillors, we actually knew our area, and so we know that there's a lot of pressure going all over the region with especially the Watercare. But you know, I think we have to really try to back the Watercare. I think a lot of people have been throwing a lot of rocks at them just recently, but to be perfectly honest, the 2 or 3 weather events that we've just had, I think they've managed it quite well. And so anyway, I'm really pleased that this the climate change and resilience is going to be a very big part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Let's move on. We've got the 3
Just one quick one,
small...
Mr. Chief Mayor, sorry.
Sorry?
Me, Bill.
Oh,
One
Bill.
quick
Bill.
hiding over
You're
here.
on my far left. You know I'd never go to my far left.
I'm never going to be on your far left, Mr. Mayor. Very quickly,
Deputy Mayor.
And at a high level, and that is that with Watercare, we must be sure to help inform our LTP that their asset management program, their AMP, and the funding and the growth are all aligned, which is really what Ross was saying. And that will help inform the LTP. We need the data around that to flow.
Thank you. That message understood. Right. Well, I have nobody else. We've got the Mangere Mountain Education Trust, the Contemporary Art Foundation and Comet. Do you want to wrap your comments together around those 3? They're not usually the most controversial.
Yeah, I'll deal with this very quickly, hopefully, Mr. Mayor. Look, we've moved from the hundreds of millions to the hundreds of thousands dealing with these entities. Their statements of intent are largely unchanged from last year. We didn't have any substantive comments as staff other than to ensure that each of the statements of intent acknowledges projects or things that they're doing that are subject to them getting external funding, so that it's quite clear that if that funding doesn't materialise, what they will and what they won't be able to do. Given that the focus of these organisations is at a far more local level rather than at a regional level, the recommendation we've actually put forward is that you authorise me to go work with the local boards to get some specific or any more specific feedback in relation to each of those CCOs rather than the governing body giving any more feedback, because as staff we don't have any more comments other than what's there.
That sounds quite straightforward. Is there any comment? Councillor Cooper.
I think, and you know, we've got to really look at these and see if it's the right mechanism and whether there is a part to play. They're not very, I mean, they're very specific, and even, you know, hearing comments, even though their acronym isn't that anymore, but, you know, it's very local, it's sort of legacy, a lot of it, and it's, I just wonder whether we're calling them CCOs, or is there some other way to do this where we don't have a direct obligation, but we may have an input in another way, you know, that we do this in another way.
We
Yeah.
we are investigating in that, and in fact, until my team deserted me and all resigned and went somewhere else, we had somebody looking at that exact issue. But and we will pick that up. We're also looking at where does the most decision making most appropriately rest for these entities if they are to remain CCOs, because with a more local focus, should the local boards be the ones making decisions around statements of intent and trustee appointments and the like.
Yeah, it does seem anomalous. Councillor Collins.
Yes, so just picking up on those points, I'm interested though in when some kind of reporting might come back on the issues you've just touched on. Granted, you don't have a team with you working on it at the moment, but we've been in discussions with the local board for some time now, and just perhaps exploring another mechanism, as has been noted, but not giving any fear or apprehension to the groups that there might not be any support that's going to be ongoing.
I'm due to do some job interviews in 20 minutes, so
Okay, let's let you go.
I'm hoping shortly.
But you'll have the report in half an hour then?
We hold them up,
Can you
we
have
might
some lunch as well?
might be counterproductive. Okay, thank you very much for that. The resolution has been moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Simpson. It's on the screen in front of you. I think I can take the three parts together, A, B and C. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. And carried. We got there. Right, I now come to item 11, Protocol for the Development of Financial Policies Affecting the Council-Controlled Organisations. Welcome Rose Leonard to the front table. The recommendations here, shall I put them on the table and then invite you to speak to them, are that we approve the protocol in attachment A of the agenda report, and that we agree the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor may approve amendments to the protocol that don't change its intent, scope and purpose. So it's been moved. Do I have a seconder for that?
Yes.
The Deputy Mayor. And Rose, if I can ask you to speak to it, please.
Through the Chair, I'd just also like to introduce to you Nicola Berquist, who's in the Mayor's office, who's actually been working with the CCOs in the development of this protocol. So just to emphasise that CCOs have been fully involved to date on this work. Very briefly, just to note the context for these protocols, the establishment of group-wide policies that are listed in your agenda are mainly aimed at the cost effectiveness and provide for consistency across the group. This consistency of approach is likely to lead to savings across the group, well, that's the anticipation. The flip side of that, however, is that there is a loss of some autonomy for the boards of these CCOs, since these policies are typically things that they had been developing on their own in the past. So hence the need for the protocol, and that this protocol is aimed at sort of mitigating that sort of loss of autonomy, if you like. So yep, they've been fully involved, and there is provision in the protocols themselves for them to have significant input as we develop these policies. So I'm happy to take questions.
Right, any questions, Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering if it's a financial policy, why the chairman of the Finance Committee is not part of the approval process.
Through the Chair, we actually just need to, at the moment, get this in place. We've got a number of policies sort of stacking up, if you like, that we want to be bringing to you in the next few months. The intention is, I think, over as the policies themselves are developed and refined, they will come themselves, the policies themselves will come to the finance
in performance meetings.
In performance
Right, okay.
meetings, so.
So the substantive policies will come back and be dealt with through finance. So I've got no problem working closely with Ross on this if he wants an input into it. Okay, any further questions? It's pretty straightforward. It sets out the process. It's very necessary and potentially quite considerable savings if we achieve these group policies, but we need to do it in the appropriate way. Councillor Simpson, you're not meant to take a second call, but we'll let you.
Just wondered, should you move and second that, bearing in mind you too are approving the amendments? It's just
I'm happy to move.
Okay.
I'm happy to second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded by the Chair and the Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee. Make that amendment accordingly. If there's no other discussion, I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 12 has been withdrawn. That's the plan change to the Auckland Unitary Plan in relation to the Three Kings Quarry development. That will come before the Finance Committee, the Planning Committee, next week. There has been significant movement and significant agreement, but we're still ironing out one or two problems, but hopefully it will be ready for Councillor Darby's committee next week and we can get resolution of it. The last item on the agenda is item number 13, the summary of governing body information memos, one there relating to project 17. The recommendation is that we receive the summary. I'll move that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpson, is there any discussion on that? If not, I'll put the resolution, the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. You can now have lunch and have the afternoon to cover your other activities. Thank you very much. No extraordinary items, I'm sorry.